The klaxon that meant a live cull sounded exactly like the one that meant a drill, and by the time Tior Santh understood which he was hearing, the human had already been in the dark for 6 minutes longer than anything with eyes should have lasted. He stood at the observation slit with his 4 hands flat against the cold glass and watched the readout, not the run. He had trained himself to watch the readout. The run was only a black rectangle full of thermal ghosts, and the ghosts were the point, and he had promised himself years ago that he would not learn their names. The readout was numbers, numbers he could survive. Subject C9, core temperature holding, blood oxygen dropping the way it should, distance covered too much. That was the number that made him lean closer. Distance covered, in a corridor she could not see, with hunters in it who could. She stopped, said the line warden beside him, a young Dreeth named Osk whose scales had not yet darkened to the full swamp green of the veterans. He said it the way you'd report a fault in a machine. Third junction. She's just sitting there. She's listening, Tior said. There's nothing to hear. We keep it quiet for a reason. She's listening to you say that. Osk's heat pits flexed, a Dreeth frown. He didn't understand, and Tior didn't explain, because the explanation was the thing Tior had spent 11 years refusing to say out loud in this building. On the thermal feed, the human's shape unfolded from its crouch. Not fast. Deliberate, the way a thing moves when it has already decided and is only now catching up to the decision. 2 Dreeth colors came in from the flanking wards, low and confident, their pit vision painting the corridor in gradients of warm and cool that no light-blind prisoner had ever been able to counter. That was the whole architecture of the Sable Reclamation. That was the theology of the place. You take a species that needs light, you take away the light, and you keep the eyes that don't. After that, obedience is not enforced. It is simply the shape of the world. The human moved between the 2 colors before either closed. Tior saw it happen and could not have told anyone how. One heat signature stumbled. The other turned toward the first, which was the wrong thing to do, and then it also stumbled, and then both of them were down and cooling, and the human shape was already 3 meters past them, and accelerating toward a junction she had no way of knowing was there. Fault, Osk said. That's a sensor fault. They didn't fall, the feed glitched. The feed didn't glitch. Then what? Sound the recall, Tior said. Now, before she reaches the nadir approach, or the provost will want to know why we let a subject map the deep wards for free. Osk sounded the recall. Somewhere in the black gas hissed from the ceiling vents, the sweet stuff that put a light-blind prisoner down in 4 breaths, and the human's thermal shape slowed and staggered and folded. Tior watched her core temperature and her oxygen, and told himself, as he always told himself, that keeping them alive was the one clean thing a physician could do in an unclean place. But he had seen the 2 colors fall, and he had seen the order she'd done it in, and a physician does not unsee a pattern once the pattern has walked through his eyes. They brought her to his gallery on a grav sled an hour later, sedated, wrists and ankles in the soft loops that reclamation called restraints, and everyone else called what they were. Tior's medical gallery sat 1 level above the wards, and it was the only room in the whole sunless facility that had light. Real light, bright and cold and blue, from panels the founders had installed so the physicians of the Ish, his people, cave dwellers, wide-eyed, 4-handed, evolved in the black throats of a world that had never seen its own sun, could do the fine work their own dim night sight couldn't. The light was for the Ish. It was, the founders had joked, the only mercy in the building, and it was not meant for the prisoners. And Tior had spent 11 years standing inside it feeling like a man warming his hands at a fire built on someone else's roof. He ran the intake scan on the human while she slept. He had scanned 400 humans in his tenure. He knew the species the way he knew the back of his upper left hand, the absurd density of them, muscle laid over bone, laid over a will that instruments could not measure, but which every physician in the conquered had learned privately to respect. Verge Class, Tier 9, the catalog called their homeworld, a predator world. The kind of designation you filed and did not think about, because thinking about it led to questions the conquered did not reward. The scan finished, Tior read it twice. Then he sat down on the physician's stool, which he never did, and looked at the sleeping human for a long time. Her eyes under the lids were not built like the catalog said. Not quite. Close, a light species eye, a daylight eye, an eye that in full sun was ordinary and in the wards was useless. But the reflective layer at the back, the tapetum the catalog swore humans lacked, was there. Faint, vestigial, a whisper of a structure that a real dark hunter and a dreith carried in full. Humans, the catalog said, were day things, bright world animals, helpless in the dark. The catalog, Tior thought, was written by people who had met humans in courtrooms and boardrooms and surrender ceremonies, in rooms with light, where a human looked at you across a table and smiled and agreed to terms. The catalog had never watched one drop two colors in a corridor with no light at all, in the exact order that made the second one turn the wrong way. He pulled her file, salvager, 20 of her world's years, taken with her crew when their hauler drifted across a conquered dark lane that had not been on any chart she could have bought. The crew had been sentenced to reclamation for trespass, which was the sentence for everything, because reclamation needed bodies and trespass was the crime you could always find. Her name was in the file, in the small flat human letters. Ren Castellano. Tior did not learn their names. It was the one rule he kept for himself. He read her name 3 times. The gallery door cycled, and the light seemed to flinch, the way light does when a dreith enters a room built for softer eyes. Provost Seneca Drawl came in without announcing herself, because announcing yourself was for people who could be refused. She was old for a dreith, her scales gone the deep green-black of the truly senior, her heat pits so developed that Tior had once watched her read a lie off a man's face by the blood that rose in it. "Physician," she said, "the recall log flagged a subject who covered 40 meters of dark ward under her own power, colors down. You sedated her before she reached the nadir approach." A pause. "You did well to recall her. I want to know what I'm looking at." "A fit subject," Tior said. "Adrenaline panic gives them a burst. It doesn't last. 2 of my colors are in the infirmary with their throats crushed. Panic did that. Panic and mass, humans are dense. The catalog underrates their strength." Seneca walked to the table and looked down at the sleeping human with the flat, unblinking attention of a creature that had never in its life needed to look away. "She's small," she said. "They usually are, the ones that are dangerous." He hadn't meant to say it. It came out flat and true, and it hung in the cold blue light, and the provost's pits flexed toward him, reading the heat of his face, and Tior made his face say nothing. "You've grown fond of them," Seneca said. It was not a question, and it was not quite an accusation. It was a diagnosis. 11 years of keeping them breathing. It does that to a physician. You start to think the thing you keep alive is yours. She straightened. "It isn't. This one covered 40 meters. That's not a fit subject. That's a defect in the dark, and the dark is the only thing this facility sells. I want her run again tomorrow, full instrumentation, and I want you to tell me exactly how a light-blind animal moved through my wards like she owned them. And then I want the defect closed." She left, the light steadied. Tior sat in the only lit room in the black facility with the human scan glowing in front of him, the faint impossible tapetum, the whisper of a structure that meant her ancestors had hunted at the edge of the light, in the gray hour when the day gave up, and the night had not yet won, when the world was neither, and a thing that could see into the neither ate well. "Close the defect," the provost had said. Tior thought about the 2 colors going down in the right order. He thought about 11 years of keeping things alive as the one clean act, and how a clean act performed inside a machine only oils the machine. He thought, and this was the thought that changed everything, and it was not a noble thought. It was a physician's thought, cold and technical and curious, he thought. The structure is already there. It is vestigial. It is a door bricked over, and I have spent my whole life learning exactly how to open doors like that in eyes like these. He was not, in that moment, a good man deciding to save someone. He wanted to be honest with himself about that later, and he was. He was a scientist looking at a brick door in the one place in the galaxy that had told him the door could not exist, and he wanted, with an appetite that frightened him, to see what was on the other side. He locked the gallery from the inside. He did not run the subject again the next day. What he did instead took the better part of 2 of the facility's long nights, and Tior would never describe the particulars of it to anyone, partly because the particulars were his and partly because there were no words in the Concord's clean clinical language for what it actually was, which was a physician reaching into the deepest architecture of a creature not his own and lifting away the brick, one layer at a time, from a door her own ancestors had built and her own species had forgotten how to use. He did not add anything alien to her. That mattered to him, and he held on to it. He gave her nothing that was not already hers. He only finished what her long-ago grandmothers had started in the gray hour on a world where seeing into the dark meant living to see the morning. On the second night, near the end, the human woke. Tior had not meant her to. He'd calibrated the sedation to a human of her mass, and her mass had lied to him the way the whole catalog lied about her kind, and her eyes came open in the bright gallery and found him, four-handed, wide-eyed, alien, leaning over her with instruments, and she did not scream. That was the first thing. She did not scream. "You're the doctor," she said. Her voice was dry and cracked. "They said there was a doctor, the one who keeps us breathing so they can do it again." "Yes," Tior said. There was no point in anything but yes. "You going to do it again?" "No," Tior said, and found that he meant it. She studied him. In the bright light, her ordinary human eyes were just eyes, brown, bloodshot, ringed with the bruised dark of a body run past its limits. And Tior thought about what he had spent 2 nights unbricking behind them, and felt something move in his chest that he had spent 11 years not feeling. "What did you do to me?" she said, not afraid, level. "I opened something," Tior said. "A thing your kind used to have and stopped needing. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if it will hold. If it does, the dark down there will not be what it was. And if it doesn't hold, then I've done you no harm, and tomorrow the provost runs you again, and I go back to keeping you breathing." He set the last instrument down. His 4 hands were very steady, and he noticed that they were steady, and he understood that he had already crossed a line he could not recross. "Ren." Her eyes changed when he said it, just slightly. "You know my name," she said. "I broke a rule to learn it." He killed the bright panels. The gallery went black, true black, reclamation black, the black that had unmade 400 humans before her, the black that was the whole theology of the place. And Tior waited in it with his own dim cave sight painting the room in soft grays, and he watched the human's face to see what the dark did to it. Her pupils blew wide. That was ordinary, any eye did that. Then they kept going. Then they did the thing that no human eye in the catalog had ever done. The faint green shine catching the trace of warmth off his own body, the tapetum waking, the bricked door standing open, and Ren Castellano looked around a room that should have been nothing to her and saw it. He knew she saw it because her gaze found the instrument tray and the door, and then it found him, not the vague heat lump of him, but him, the count of his hands, the tilt of his head. And she looked at Tior Santh in the dark with the dark in her eyes, and for the first time in the 11 years he had worked in that building, someone who was not supposed to be able to see him could. "Oh," Ren said very quietly. It was not fear. Tior had spent his career reading the fear off faces, off the heat of them, off the small animal signals that even the bravest could not fully hide. There was no fear in her. "Oh," she said again, and turned her head slowly, taking in the black room that was no longer black, and something in the set of her jaw settled, the way a tool settles into the hand it was made for. "It's not empty." "No," Tior said. "The dark is never empty. It only looks that way to eyes that were never asked to try." She sat up on the table. In the black in his gray cave sight, he watched her look at her own hands, turn them over, watched her understand that she could see her own hands with no light at all. Then she looked at the restraint loops still around one wrist, the ones he hadn't removed, and she looked at them the way she'd looked at everything else, evaluating, cataloging, cold, and Tior realized he had just handed the most dangerous thing in the building, the one sense it had been missing. "They're going to run me again," Ren said. "Tomorrow, the Black Run, full instrumentation. The provost wants to know how you move through her wards." Tior hesitated, then said the rest, because there was no longer any point in half measures. "The Black Run is the shallow gauntlet. Ambush wards, gas vents, colors with pit vision hunting a prisoner who can't see them coming. 400 humans before you have run it. Most don't finish. The ones who do finish are the ones the provost decides are worth breaking slowly. And I can see now. And you can see now." Ren was quiet for a moment. In the dark her modified eyes moved, tracking the room, and Tior could not read her the way he read everyone else, because the fear that should have been there simply wasn't, and without the fear he had nothing to read. "Don't tell them," she said finally, "that I can see. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever I do, you didn't do anything. You kept me breathing. That's your story and you don't move off it. They'll test me. The provost reads heat. She'll know if I lie." "Then don't lie." Ren swung her legs off the table, stood, swayed, steadied in total darkness, with the unconscious surety of someone who could see the floor. "You kept me breathing. That's true. Say the true thing and stop before the part that isn't. She can't read a sentence you don't finish." Tior stared at her in the gray. "You've done this before," he said. "Held something back from a thing that could see through you." "I'm a salvager." Ren found the door with her eyes and walked to it in the black without groping, without slowing, and it undid something in Tior's chest to watch her do it. "You want to know the first thing you learn, boarding a dead ship with your lamp dying. The dark's got a shape. Most people never learn to read it because they never have to. I've had to my whole life." She put her hand on the door. "Your provost took the light away to make us blind." She never once thought about the people who already knew how to work without it. Tior brought the bright panels back up. The gallery flooded blue-white, and Ren's eyes went ordinary again, human, squinting against the glare, and she looked for that instant like exactly what the catalog said she was: small, unarmed, breakable, a day-thing helpless in a dark world. That Tior understood was going to be the most dangerous thing about her, not the eyes, the fact that with the panels up she still looked like prey. "They'll come for you at the next shift," he said. "For the run." "Good," Ren said, and there was nothing behind the word at all, no heat, no anger, no fear, just a flat readiness that Tior's instruments could not have measured, and that made the 4 hands of an Ish physician go cold. "Let them run me in the dark. I've been wanting to get a look at the place." They came for her 4 hours later, and Ren let them take her. That was the first thing the line warden Osk noticed, and he noticed it because it was wrong. Prisoners did not let you take them. They went limp, or they fought, or they wept, or they did the thing the veterans called ghosting, where the body walked and the person inside had already left. The human did none of that. She stood when the ward opened. She put her wrists out for the loop. She walked between the 2 Dreeth guards at a pace that made them adjust to her instead of the other way around, and she kept her head up in the dark like someone taking a tour. Osk walked behind her with a shock glance and a growing unease he could not have named. He had been at the Sable Reclamation for 2 of his world's years. He had processed humans before. They came in loud and left quiet, and the space between was the facility's work, and he had never questioned it because questioning it was not a thing a young Dreeth did if he wanted his scales to ever darken past line warden green. But he had watched the feed of this one dropping 2 colors in the right order, and he had watched Physician Santh watch it. And now, he was walking behind a small, light-blind animal who moved through his black corridors like she'd built them. "Junction," he said, out of habit, "the warning you gave a prisoner so they didn't walk face first into the wall and cost you paperwork." Ren turned the corner before his warning finished. Osk stopped for half a step. Then he told himself the corridors were simple, that anyone could learn the count of them, that she'd been through here on the sled and remembered. He told himself several things, and none of them were the thing his pits were quietly reporting, which was that the human's face carried no fear heat at all, no rise of blood, no flush of the cornered animal. She walked into the mouth of the black run the way you'd walk into your own kitchen. They stripped the loop off her wrist at the run's threshold. That was procedure. The run was meant to be survived unaided or not at all. That was the point. The provost watched from the control gallery above, a shape behind smoked glass, and the young human stood at the edge of a corridor that had killed more of her kind than Osk wanted to count, and she rolled her shoulders once, like a laborer before a shift. "Subject C9, the provost's voice came flat over the address. "The run is 1 kilometer. There are hunters in it. Reach the far door and you earn a meal and a light for 1 hour. That is the only light you will be offered. Fail to reach it and the run ends when we decide it ends." A pause. "You covered 40 meters yesterday. Let's see the rest." The threshold gate dropped behind Ren, and the corridor swallowed her, and every light in the run died at once, and Osk turned to the gallery feed to watch a light-blind animal die by degrees the way 400 had before her. That was not what he watched. The dark came down like a lid, and Ren stood still inside it and let her eyes finish waking. It took a breath, too. The world assembled itself out of nothing the way a salvage hold assembled itself when your lamp died and your pupils remembered their job. First the gross shapes, the walls, the low ceiling, the corridor bending away. Then the finer grain, the seams in the floor plate, the grill of a gas vent set flush overhead. Then the warmth, which was the new thing, the thing the doctor had given back to her, the soft, radiant glow of everything that held heat. The walls were cool. The floor was cooler. And down the corridor, tucked into a recessed ambush ward the designers had cut so a hunter could wait unseen beside a prisoner blundering past, a shape sat warm and patient and certain, its heat pits open, its long green-scaled body coiled to take her the moment she stumbled by. It was waiting for a blind thing. Ren was not anymore a blind thing. She did not go faster. That was the discipline of it, and it was salvage discipline. The same discipline that kept you from grabbing the loose plate that would bring the whole ceiling down on your crew. She moved at the pace of prey, shuffling, uncertain, one hand out along the wall, the picture of a light-blind human feeling her way, and the color in the ambush ward read that picture and believed it, and let her come. She stopped 1 pace short of the ward. The color, expecting her to pass, expecting to take her from behind and to the side the way the ward was built for, had to change its plan, and changing its plan meant moving first, and moving first in the dark against a thing that could see was the last mistake it would make in any way that mattered. Ren watched it commit. She stepped inside the reach of it, where its size stopped being an advantage, and she did the cold, economical thing salvagers did to loose fittings that had to come free in one motion, because there was no time for a second, and the color folded down into the recess it had been so proud of, and the corridor was quiet again. She stood over it a moment. It was still breathing. She had made sure of that without quite deciding to, and she noted the fact and filed it and moved on, because the run was 1 kilometer and this had been 10 meters. Above in the control gallery, Osk stared at the feed. The thermal camera had shown him the color's signature drop. It had shown him, a half-second before, the human signature do something he had no category for, not the panic scramble of prey, not the flailing of a blind thing fighting shadows, but a short, exact economy of motion, the movement of someone who could see precisely where to put her hands. He looked at the provost's shape behind the smoked glass and found that she had gone very still. "Sensor fault," Osk said, because it was his job to say it. "No," the provost said. On the feed, the human reached the second ambush ward. This one held two colors, staggered, the way the run's hardest stretch was built, one to spook the prey forward into the second. 400 humans had died in the stretch between those two wards, funneled from the first hunter into the jaws of the second, screaming in a dark they could not read. Osk had watched a dozen of them go. He knew the choreography of it by heart. Ren broke the choreography. She did not run forward from the first color into the second. She went at the first one directly, before it expected her, from an angle the ward wasn't cut for, and when the second color lunged into the space where a fleeing human should have been, there was no fleeing human there. There was only its own partner, and the dark, and a small warm shape already moving low beneath the tangle of them. And then there were two more colors down in the recess, and the human was through the hardest stretch of the black run in under a minute without taking a hit. Osk realized he was standing. He did not remember standing. "Physician Santh," the provost said into the gallery comm very softly, "come up here. I want you to watch this with me." Tior climbed the stair with his 4 hands cold, and his face arranged into the flat professional blankness that had kept him alive in the Concord for a career. He had known this was coming from the moment he'd killed the panels and watched Ren's pupils keep going. He had told himself he'd built a plan for it. He had built no plan for it. There was no plan for standing beside a heat-treating provost, while the thing you'd secretly remade walked through her theology like it was wet paper. He reached the gallery. Seneca did not look at him. She was watching the feed, where the human had paused at the third ward, a gas ward, the vents primed, the sweet stuff that dropped a light-blind prisoner in 4 breaths, and was doing something the feed could not quite resolve. "Tell me what I'm watching," Seneca said. On the feed, Ren had found the gas vent. Not fumbled into it, found it, reached up, and jammed something into the grill, a scrap of cloth torn from her own coverall, packing it tight. When the ward's sensors registered her weight on the trip plate and dumped the gas, most of it stayed backed up behind the clogged grill, and the thin wash that got through was nothing. A sweetness in the air she walked through holding her breath, out the far side, gone. "She clogged the vent," the provost said. She said it slowly, tasting it, because it was impossible. She found the vent in total darkness and she clogged it before she tripped the plate. She knew the plate was there. Seneca turned her head, and her heat pits were open all the way, and Tior understood that he was about to be read down to the blood. "How does a light-blind human know where a trip plate is, physician?" "She doesn't," Tior said. "True. The trip plate wasn't visible even to Ren, it was under the floor. She felt the seam in the floor where the plate meets the deck. Humans have fine touch. The catalog underrates it. True and useful, and it explained one thing while hiding the larger thing, and Tior set it flat and let it stand." Seneca held his face in her pit vision for a long moment. Then she looked back at the feed, and Tior breathed once silently and hated how much he had needed to. "The vent, perhaps," she allowed. "Touch, fine, explain the colors." "Panic strength, mass, I told you." "You told me, 4 colors now. 4 of my hunters in the dark taken by an animal that cannot see them." The provost's voice did not rise, it never rose. That was the thing about her that Tior had always found more frightening than any warden's shout. "An animal takes 1 hunter by luck, physician, 2 by a very good day. 4 is not luck, 4 is a capability, and every capability has a source." She let that sit. "Find me the source." On the feed, Ren reached the far door of the black run. She had crossed 1 kilometer of the deadliest dark in the facility in under 9 minutes, unhit, having disabled 4 hunters and defeated 3 ambush wards, and she stood at the far door and waited for the meal and the hour of light the provost had promised, and the provost did not give the order to open it. "Provost," the gallery warden said. "She reached the door, protocol says." "I know what protocol says." Seneca watched the small human shape stand patiently at the door in the dark. Open it, give her the light, and her meal. A pause. Let her think she won something. I want to see what she does when she thinks she's won. The far door opened. Light spilled into the run, 1 hour of it, the promised mercy. And on the feed, Wren's shape stepped into it and her posture changed. Shoulders dropping, head lowering, and she put a hand up to shield her eyes from a brightness that Tior knew she no longer strictly needed. She was performing. She was performing relief, performing the praise gratitude for a scrap, and she was doing it for a camera she could not possibly have known was still watching, because she had assumed it was, because she was a salvager and salvagers assumed the ship was still live until they'd pulled the last cell. Look at that, the provost murmured, almost fond. She's grateful. Tior looked at the human pretending to be grateful in the 1 hour of light she'd been thrown, and he thought, no. She is counting the exits. And he kept his face flat and said nothing, and felt the cold in his 4 hands spread up into his chest, because he had wanted to see what was behind the brick door, and now he was seeing it, and it was looking back at all of them and taking notes. The light lasted an hour. They gave her a meal, a protein cake and water, the reward, and Wren ate it slowly in the lit cell at the end of the run, and when the hour ended and the light died, the feed switched to thermal and showed her still sitting there, calm, in a dark that was no longer dark to her, eating the last of the cake without hurry. That was the image the provost carried out of the gallery, a human who ate her reward in the dark at the same pace she'd eaten it in the light. Deepen her placement, Seneca told the gallery warden on her way out. Move her to the lower wards and physician. She stopped at the stair. The source. I want it by the next long night. If a defect in the dark is loose in my facility, I close it. That is the whole job. You know that is the whole job. She left. Tior stood in the gallery with Osk, both of them looking at the thermal feed of a small human finishing a protein cake in the black. That's not possible, Osk said quietly. It was the first honest thing Tior had ever heard a warden say in that building. Warden Santh, physician, what she did in there. That's not possible. Prisoners can't do that. No, Tior agreed. They can't. Then how? Go back to your post, Osk. The young Dreeth went. Tior stayed, watching the feed, watching Wren finish the cake and set the wrapper down neatly and fold her hands and wait, and he understood 2 things with a clarity that made him want to sit down again. The first was that he had not saved a prisoner, he had armed one. The second was that the provost had just moved his armed prisoner into the deepest, darkest, deadliest wards in the Sable Reclamation, the lower levels, where the true traps were, where the nadir waited, where the facility kept the horrors it didn't put on the shallow run, and she had done it thinking she was tightening the leash. She had just handed Wren Castellano the whole map. Down in the newly assigned ward in the lower dark, Wren was not alone. Focal moves down to her. She'd heard the breathing before the gate even finished cycling, small, fast, the breathing of something young and trying to be quiet. Her eyes found it against the far wall. A child. A human child, 6 or 7 of Earth's years, knees drawn up, face turned toward the sound of the opening gate with the wide blind stare of someone who could not see, and had learned that the dark meant something was coming. Wren crossed the cell and crouched down an arm's length away, close enough to speak low, not close enough to crowd. "Hey," she said. "Hey, I'm not one of them, I'm like you, what's your name?" A long silence, then in a small cracked voice, "Lark." "Lark, good name." Wren sat down against the wall beside her, shoulder to shoulder, so the kid could feel she was there. "How long you been down here, Lark?" "I don't know," the child's voice wobbled. "There's no light, there's no light and things come and I can't see them coming." Wren looked around the cell with her stolen eyes. She saw the vent in the ceiling. She saw the seam of the trip plate by the gate. She saw the observation slit, and the faint warm smear behind it of something watching, and she saw, in the corner, the small pile of protein cake wrappers that told her how long the child had been kept alive down here for whatever the lower wards used children for. "Okay," Wren said, and her voice did not change, stayed low and level and warm, the salvager's voice you used on a panicking crewmate when the hull was singing and the air was going. "Listen to me, Lark. I can see. You can't, nobody can. I can now. A doctor fixed my eyes, and here's what's going to happen." She took the child's small, cold hand and held it, and in the dark Lark could not see Wren's face, but she could hear it, and what she heard was certainty. The things that come in the dark, they can see us and they think we can't see them. That's their whole game. That's the only thing they've got. Wren's thumb moved once over the back of the child's hand. "I can see them now, so the game's over. They just don't know it yet." She proved it that first night, and she proved it small, because a salvager who tries to free the whole wreck on the first pass is a salvager who brings the ceiling down. There was an ambush ward cut into the corridor outside their cell, 40 meters toward the ring, in the place where the cold air pooled, and a color used it. Wren had watched the routine twice from the observation of her own eyes. The color came on the slow shift, settled into the recess, went still, and waited for a prisoner to be herded past on the next cull, or simply for one to blunder out feeling for the water drip that the wards let fall at the ring junction, the one small mercy that was also a lure. It was efficient. It had probably taken a dozen of the prisoners now sleeping around her. Wren did not attack it, she unbuilt it. She went out into the corridor in the dark hours when the shift was thin, and she moved along the cold wall where her heat read faintest, and she studied the ambush ward the way she'd study a fitting she meant to free clean. The recess, the angle it covered, the trip plate at the ring junction that told the wards a prisoner was in reach, and the water drip, the lure, ticking its slow drops into the dark. She could not remove the color that would come to sit there, but she could move the pieces the color trusted. She packed the trip plate's seam with grit from the floor so it read a body's weight one full pace early, at a spot the recess did not cover. She widened the water drip's fall with a bent scrap of tray metal, so it ticked from 2 places instead of 1, so a herded prisoner following the sound would drift wide of the killing angle. Small things. Things that only mattered to a hunter who trusted the ground to do half its work. The next time the ward ran, the color settled into its recess and waited, and a prisoner was herded past, and the prisoner tripped the plate a pace early, and the color committed a pace early, into empty corridor, and the prisoner, following a water drip that now ticked wide, drifted past the recess out of reach and kept going, blind, terrified, alive, never knowing how close the dark had come. The color crouched in its ruined ambush and did not understand what had failed. Wren watched it from the vent and understood every part of it, and filed the whole thing, and went back to the cell where Lark slept. And that was the first trap she turned in the lower dark, and it did not so much as leave a mark for the wardens to find. "Did you do a thing?" Lark whispered when she came back. The child had learned to feel her return. "Small thing." Wren settled against the wall, moved some furniture around, made a room a little safer than it was. She closed her eyes, which changed nothing about what they saw, and it was almost a comfort, the way old habits are. You do enough small things, Lark, you never have to do a big one. That's the whole trick. People think it's about the big move. It's never about the big move. The whisper started after that. It started because a prisoner walked past an ambush ward and lived when the dark said he shouldn't have, and he told the cell beside him, and there was no reason he should have lived, and the not having a reason was the thing that traveled. Something was in the lower dark that made the traps miss. Something was moving the furniture. It went cell to cell in the black over the next long night, thin as the water drip, and the wardens did not hear it yet, and Wren did not encourage it, because a whisper you feed is a whisper that gets you found. She only kept moving the furniture, night after night, small thing after small thing, and the lower wards began, without any of them being able to say how, to feel very slightly less like a place where the dark always won. The lower wards ran on a schedule the prisoners had learned to dread without ever seeing it, and the schedule had a name the wardens used and the prisoners had stolen: the Culling Nights. Tior knew the mechanics because the mechanics ended up on his table. Every few long nights the lower wards were opened, the internal gates unlocked, the prisoners let loose into the connecting corridors, and hunters were put in among them, and the prisoners who wanted a meal or a light, or simply to not be the one taken, ran and hid and betrayed each other in the black while the hunters worked. It was not a call for numbers. The provost did not waste stock. It was a call for spirit. It taught the wards, over and over in the only language the dark spoke, that there was no solidarity in the black, no help, no one coming, only the pit-eyed hunters and your own useless blindness, and the mathematics of being slightly faster than the prisoner beside you. 400 humans, and the ones who broke fastest broke on the Culling Nights. The night after they moved Wren to the lower wards, the gates opened. She felt the gate release through the floor before she heard it, the deck's faint shudder, the change in the air pressure as the corridor beyond opened up. She was already moving. She'd spent the hours since her arrival doing what she did on any dead ship, walking the space in her head until it was hers. She knew this cell, and the corridor outside it, and the 3 cells adjacent, and the vents, and the trip plates and the 2 observation slits, and the recessed ambush ward 40 meters toward the ring corridor where the cold air pooled. She knew where the hunters would come from because she knew where she would wait if she were hunting the blind. Lark, she was already lifting the child, settling her onto her back, the small arms going around her neck the way they'd practiced twice in the dark hours because Wren did not do anything once that her life might depend on doing right. Remember, you don't make a sound, you don't grab, you are a backpack. Can you be a backpack? I can be a backpack, Lark whispered. Good girl. Out in the ring corridor, the Culling Night began, and it began the way it always began, with screaming. Wren moved into it against every instinct a prey animal owned, toward the sound, low along the cold wall where her own heat would read faintest to the pit eyes, and her stolen sight painted the horror of the Culling Night in front of her in soft grays and warm glows. Prisoners, humans, and a few other light-blind species, the conquered had swept up over the years, scattering, colliding, feeling along walls, freezing at sounds, doing all the useless, frightened things that the dark forced on the blind. And among them, unhurried, the hunters. 3 Dreath colors tonight, moving through the panicking prisoners with the lazy confidence of predators who had never once in their lives been prey, tapping a shoulder here, herding a knot of humans there, drawing it out. One color had a woman cornered against a bulkhead, enjoying it, its heat pits open, its posture the relaxed slouch of a thing that owned the room. Wren took it from the side while it was busy owning the room. She set Lark down against the wall first, backpack off, stay. And then she crossed the space in the dark and did the salvager's thing to the color's leg, the loose-fitting thing, the thing that made a joint come free in one direction it was never built to go, and the color went down without ever having seen her, and the cornered woman flinched back from the sound of it dropping and could not understand in her blindness why the monster had simply fallen. Go left, Wren told her low. 12 steps, then a cell on your right, the gate stuck open, get inside and stay small. The woman stared toward the voice with blind eyes. Go, now. She went. Wren picked Lark back up and moved on and did it again. She did not fight the Culling Night. That was the thing the wardens would spend the next long night trying to understand, watching the feeds. She did not stand and battle. She moved through the dark like a current, taking hunters from angles they never saw, redirecting blind prisoners toward the cells she'd already scouted as safe, whispering roots into terrified ears, go right, low ceiling, mind the plate at the 3rd seam, and vanishing again before anyone she helped could do more than clutch at the space where her voice had been. The prisoners never saw her. They only felt the hunters stop coming, and heard a calm voice in the dark telling them where to hide. And by the time the Culling Night was supposed to have broken another dozen spirits, the lower wards had gone strange and quiet, and the 3 colors were down, and something the prisoners could not name had walked among them and turned the night inside out. They started that night to call her something. It went mouth to mouth in the black, whispered cell to cell in the hours after, in a dozen languages the conquered had caged together down there. There was a thing in the dark that hunted the hunters. It saw them. It could not be seen. It moved once and they fell, and it left you a root and a word, hide, and it was on your side. The wardens heard the whispering the way you hear weather. They did not yet have the shape of it, but something had changed in the lower wards, and the thing that had changed was the one thing the Sable Reclamation had been built, from its first black stone, to make impossible. Hoping. His name was Vesk, and he had walked the lower wards for 6 years, and he knew the sound of them the way a man knows the sound of his own house at night. And the night after the culling that went wrong, the wards sounded different, and it put his scales up. The wards were supposed to sound like fear. That was the working state, the healthy state, the sound of a place doing its job, the small constant fear noises of the blind, the shifting, the held breath, the weeping that never fully stopped. Vesk had walked in that sound for 6 years and stopped hearing it the way you stop hearing your own heart. Now he walked the ring and the sound had changed, and it took him half the walk to place what was missing, and when he placed it his pits flexed and his hand went to his lance. The fear was still there, but under it, threaded through it, was something he had never once heard in the lower dark, and it was worse than the fear because he had no procedure for it. It was quiet, not the quiet of the broken, the ghosted, the ones who'd left their own bodies. He knew that quiet was fine, that quiet was the job done. This was the quiet of people listening, waiting. The wards had gone alert. And a ward that was afraid was a ward that obeyed. But a ward that was listening was a ward that had heard something worth listening for. And Vesk walked the whole ring with his lance up and his pits open, and could not find the thing they were listening to. Because the thing they were listening to could see him coming and was already somewhere he wasn't. He stopped at a cell where an old 4-armed prisoner sat against the gate, and he put his light on the creature, and he asked it against every rule, because you did not speak to stock. Speaking to stock was how a warden started to slip. What's changed down here? The old prisoner turned its blind gray face toward his voice, and it did not flinch from the light it could not see, and it said, in the flat, worn voice of a thing that had outlived its own fear years ago, "You feel it too. Good, you should." A pause. "Something down here hunts the hunters now. It sees in the black, it moves the traps, it leaves us a root and a word." The gray head tilted. "We can't see it either, Warden, but it's on our side. And it's been on our side for 6 nights, and none of you have caught it, and every night it doesn't get caught, we listen a little harder." The old thing almost smiled. "That's what changed. You built a place that runs on us having nothing to listen for, and now we've got something." Vesk should have reported it. He did not report it that night, and he told himself it was because there was nothing to report. No subject, no signature, no fault on the board. But the truth was closer to the thing he'd heard in the old prisoner's voice, and it followed him out of the ward and up the stairs and would not leave him. For the first time in 6 years, walking the lower dark with a light and a lance and every advantage the facility could give him, Warden Vesk had felt, faintly, unmistakably, like the one who couldn't see. Seneca Drawl watched the culling night feeds 4 times through, and Tior watched her watch them, and neither of them spoke until she reached the end of the 4th pass. "3 colors," she said, "again." "And this?" She froze the feed on a frame that showed nothing, a corridor, prisoners against a wall, the smear of the human's heat signature already half out of frame. She moves through them. She does not hunt them the way a predator hunts. She moves through them the way water moves through a wreck. She finds the openings, and she puts the others where the hunters aren't. The provost turned. "You have had 4 long nights, physician. Tell me the source." Tior had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed a dozen versions and discarded them all, because Seneca would read the heat of a lie off his face before the words finished, and so he had settled in the end on the only strategy Wren had left him. Say a true thing and stop before the part that wasn't. She's a salvager, he said. By trade, before you took her ship. Salvagers work in the dark, dead hulls, failed lamps, no light. Her whole life she's trained to move through black spaces by touch and sound and memory. The catalog doesn't record the trade because the catalog records species, not professions. He let it land. You didn't cage a typical human, Provost. You caged one whose entire craft is functioning where others can't see. She's not defeating the dark. She's at home in it in a way her file never told you, because her file never asked. It was true. Every word of it was true. It was not the whole truth, and the whole truth was in Tior's own hands, in what he'd done on 2 long nights with the panels down. But the part he'd said was true enough that his blood didn't rise when he said it, and Seneca's pits read a man telling the truth, because he was. She held him in her vision for a long time. Touch and memory, she said at last. Salvage, you're telling me she's counting corridors and reading floors and getting lucky in the tangle. I'm telling you she's the wrong human for a dark prison, and your intake had no way to know it. Seneca turned back to the frozen feed. And Tior, watching her, understood that he had bought a day, maybe 2, and no more, because the provost was old and clever, and her theology could survive one exceptional prisoner, one salvager, one fluke of trade. What it could not survive was what the feed showed next, and Tior had not seen it yet, and Seneca advanced the frame. The human, the smear of her, crossed a patch of corridor where a gas ward had dumped its load, the sweet stuff hanging thick, and she crossed it holding a scrap of cloth to the child's face and to her own, timing her breath, threading a lethal cloud she could not have smelled coming in time, not by touch, not by memory in the dark at speed, with a child on her back. Explain the gas, Seneca said quietly. Touch didn't find that in time. Memory didn't map a cloud that moves. She saw it, physician. She saw the shimmer of it in the air. There is no shimmer in the dark unless you can see. She turned, and her pits were open all the way, and her voice was still flat and still quiet, and that was the most dangerous it had ever been. She can see in the dark. Say it. I want to watch your face when you say it. Tior's blood rose. He could not stop it. He felt it come up into his cheeks under his own control's floor, the heat of a cornered man, and Seneca's pits caught it. And she nodded slowly, the way you nod when an instrument confirms what you already knew. There it is, she said. There's the truth. She did not raise her voice. She never would. You did something to her eyes. I kept her breathing, Tior said. It was the last true sentence he had. That's my whole job. You told me that yourself. That is the whole job. You did something to her eyes. I kept her breathing. Seneca studied him. Then, unhurried, she keyed the gallery calm. Detain physician Santh, she said. Confine him to his gallery. He does not leave, he does not treat, he does not touch a subject, and put out a hunt contract to the outer rings. She was already turning away, the matter of Tior closed in her mind, a smaller problem than the one on the feed. I want the Vorith, the one they call the color, not a line warden, not a facility hunter, a professional. Tell it there is a thing in my dark that sees, and it will come, because that is the one prey a Vorith cannot resist. She looked back at the frozen feed one last time, at the small human smear threading the gas with a child on her back. She turned my dark against me in 4 nights. Let's see how she does against something that was born in it. The young warden walked the physician up to the gallery level with a shock glance he did not raise, and neither of them spoke until they reached the gallery door. And then Osk stopped, and looked at the 4-handed ish he had worked beside for 2 years, and asked the question he was not supposed to ask. Is it true, what you did? Tior looked at him. Does it matter to you? Osk's pits flexed. I've worked the culling nights, he said low, glancing at the empty corridor. 2 years. I told myself it was the job. I told myself they broke because they were weak, because that's what the dark is for, to find the weak ones, and he stopped. And then this one comes, and she's not weak, and she's not strong the way we mean it, she can see. That's all. You gave her the one thing we take away, and everything down there fell apart in 4 nights. He looked at Tior with something that was not quite awe and not quite fear. How long has it been true, physician, that the only thing holding them was the dark, that if any of them could see, the whole thing was just a room, with scared people in it? And us? Tior did not answer, because the answer would have cost the young warden something he might not survive, and Tior had done enough remaking of people who hadn't asked for it. "Confine me," he said gently. "You have your orders. Confine me, ask, and go back to your post and watch what she does to the color, and then decide for yourself what the dark was for." Ask confined him. He locked the gallery from the outside, and he stood there a moment with his hand on the cold door, and then he went back to his post, and he did not, Tior noticed through the observation slit, take the shock lance back to the armory. He kept it. Tior filed that, the way Ren filed things, and sat down in the only lit room in the black facility, confined, useless, cut off from the human he'd armed, and waited to see whether he'd remain a survivor or only a longer, more interesting death. Confinement left him one thing, and it was the thing that undid him. The gallery's medical feed still showed the ward status board, because a physician had to know when a subject was dying, and the board did not show him faces or hunts, only the cold ledger of gate states and life signs across the wards. He watched it for hours because there was nothing else to watch. And slowly, in the flat scroll of it, he learned to read the thing the wardens hadn't caught yet. Cells logging stuck open that had never logged stuck open before. Trip plates reporting phantom weight and then nothing. A drift in the numbers, ward by ward, that was not random, that moved the way a person moves when they are quietly taking a building apart from the inside and covering their work as they go. Tior sat in the light and read the ledger of a facility being unbuilt one small entry at a time, and no instrument he could have told the provost what he was seeing, because what he was seeing was not in any of the readings. It was in the shape they made together. It was a person. It was her. And he found that his 4 hands had stopped being cold, and that he was, for the first time in 11 years inside that building, quietly and helplessly proud of something he had done. She knew something had changed because the schedule broke. There was no culling night when the schedule said there should be. There was, instead, a silence, and Ren had been alive long enough to distrust a silence that arrived off schedule. She sat with Lark in the cell she'd made theirs. She jammed the gate's trip plate 2 nights ago, quietly, so it read as stuck open on the warden's board and no hunter would waste a cull entering a cell already logged as breached. And she catalogued the silence and did not like it. "Something's coming," Lark whispered. The child had gotten better at the dark, not because she could see it, but because she'd learned to read Ren, and Ren had gone still. Yeah, Ren didn't lie to the kid. She decided that early. Something new. They stopped sending the same thing because the same thing stopped working. She turned it over. 4 colors on the run, 3 on the culling night, the prisoners whispering. Whatever she'd broken it visibly, and things that ran prisons did not lose visibly and do nothing. "They're bringing in something better. That's what I do." "Are you scared?" Ren considered the question honestly because the kid deserved honesty and because the answer mattered tactically. Was she scared? She checked, the way you checked a suit seal before a spacewalk methodically, without drama. "No," she said, and found it was true, and found the reason it was true, and told the kid the reason because the reason was the whole point. "They spent a long time, Lark, building a place that only works if we can't see. Every trap down here, every hunter, every game, it's all built on one thing, the dark. They bet everything on the dark." She looked around the black cell that was, to her, a dim gray room with a sleeping vent and a jammed plate and a child leaning warm against her side. And then they took a person who grew up working in the dark, and they gave her back the one thing that makes the dark just a room. Ren's voice stayed level, stayed low, stayed the salvager's voice for the panicking crewmate. They built a whole world around a bet, and they don't understand yet that they already lost it. Everything they send now, they're sending into my house. They just think it's still theirs. Somewhere far off in the ring corridors, A new gate cycled, a big one, an outer gate, the kind that only opened for something arriving from beyond the facility, and a new heat signature entered the lower dark. And even at that distance, Ren's stolen eyes caught the wrongness of it, the way it moved, low and many-legged and patient and utterly silent, a cold-blooded thing that ran nearly the temperature of the walls, so that even the pit-eyed wardens would have struggled to track it. A hunter built by its own dark world to erase the last warm thing in any room. The color had arrived, and Ren Castellano watched it come, and did not move, and did not fear, and began, in the cold procedural back of her salvager's mind, to take it apart. The color did not hunt the way the Dreith hunted, and it took Ren one full night of watching it to understand why that mattered. She watched it from the vents. She'd found in her mapping that the lower wards were laced with a maintenance crawl, narrow, cold, meant for cleaning drones, too tight for a Dreith color and beneath their dignity besides. And she'd spent the first hours of the color's arrival not fighting it but learning it, folded into the crawl space with Lark tucked behind her, watching the professional work. It was beautiful in the way that a well-made tool is beautiful, and Ren respected it the way she respected a pressure that could kill her. The Vorith ran cold, its long blue-black chitin held almost the temperature of the walls, so that on the warden's own thermal boards it barely showed, a hunter the facility's own instruments could lose. It did not stalk. It waited. It would settle at a corridor junction and go so still that even Ren's stolen eyes lost it against the cold plating until it moved, and it would send out a soft click, barely a sound, and read the echo of the space, and read in the echo the shape of anything warm and breathing that the space contained. It hunted by making the dark answer questions, and when it found a prisoner it did not rush. It herded. It made small sounds from calculated directions, and the blind prisoner fled from the sounds, and the sounds were placed so that fleeing carried the prisoner exactly where the color wanted them, into a dead end, into a waiting angle, into its reach. It used the prisoner's own panic as the leash. It had probably never in its career had to touch a fleeing thing before the fleeing thing had already walked itself into the trap. 2 prisoners went that first night. Ren watched both from the vents and did not intervene, and it was the hardest cold thing she had done since her ship was taken, and she did it anyway, because she was a salvager, and salvagers did not spend their air on a fitting they didn't yet know how to free. She watched the color take 2 people apart with sound, and she learned. It clicked and read echoes. It herded with place noise. It ran cold. It was patient past any praise patience. And it had one flaw, and Ren found it near dawn, and the flaw was this. It had never once in its life hunted something that could see it. Its entire method assumed a blind quarry. The clicks, the echoes, the herding, the cold camouflage, all of it was built to hunt things that ran from sound because sound was all they had. A prey that could see the color coming did not run from the placed noises. A prey that could see did not walk itself into the herded dead ends. A prey that could see could simply watch the cold blue shape settle into its ambush angle, and then choose, coldly, not to be where the ambush was. But seeing it was not the same as beating it. Ren understood that too. She could see the color. She could not outmuscle it, outrun it, or outweight it. It was faster than her. It never tired, and it would happily spend a week in the dark to take one warm thing. Seeing it only meant she got to choose the ground, and choosing the ground for a salvager was the whole game. It nearly found Lark before she was ready, and that was the night Ren stopped respecting the color and started fearing it. The child was in the crawl space, tucked into the branch Ren had chosen, and Ren was 2 corridors off reading the color work a knot of prisoners in the ring when the Vorith did a thing none of the Dreith had ever done. It stopped hunting the warm crowd and went to the walls. It had heard something, a shift, a breath, the smallest wrong echo out of the maintenance crawl, and it crossed the ring corridor and put its long cold head against the vent grill not 10 meters from where Lark lay, and it clicked, soft, into the crawl space, and read the echo of it, and began to trace the branch toward the one warm patch that 100 generations of Vorith instinct told it did not belong in a cold, dead wall. Wren felt her own heat spike and killed it against the floor. Then she did the only thing there was to do, which was give the color something warmer and closer and more insulting to chase. She came out of a hatch behind it, in full view of its pit sense, warm and unhidden and moving, and she did the salvager's thing to a loose length of conduit. She'd already worked free of the wall and let it clang down the corridor away from the vent, and she was already running after the sound, loud, warm, obvious, the most findable thing in the ward, a prey animal breaking cover in a panic, the one thing a hunter cannot ignore. The color took its head from the grill. It weighed the faint, cold wrongness in the wall against the loud, warm certainty fleeing down the corridor, and it chose the certainty, because certainty is what a professional is built to close on, and it came off the vent and after Wren, and Lark in the wall, stayed a warm patch in a cold branch and lived. Wren led the color a long way that night, longer than she wanted to. It was faster than her, and it did not tire, and twice it nearly closed. And once she felt the air move behind her and had to go through a propped cell and drop a gate on her own jammed timer to buy the 10 meters that let her lose it in the long acoustic ring. She lost it in the end, the way you lose a thing that hunts by echo. She went cold and still in a cross corridor, and made herself into nothing and let it click the mudded ring and find no answer it could trust. And it prowled and clicked, and finally moved off to easier warmth. And Wren lay against the cold wall with her heart going hard and did the cold arithmetic. It had found the wall. It had found the crawl. Instinct had walked it within 10 meters of the child before Wren even knew it was hunting the walls at all. Seeing the color had not been enough tonight. Only spending herself as bait had been enough, and bait was a thing you could only be so many times before the hunter learned the shape of the trick. She could not keep the child alive by reacting. She had to end the color and end it clean, and end it soon, before it went to the walls one more time on a night she was 2 corridors too far to answer. She went back and moved Lark deeper, and made her repeat the rule twice more than usual, and did not let the child hear that anything had been close. Then she sat in the dark and stopped thinking about the color as a hunter and started thinking about it as a fitting, a hard one. A seized one, the kind that will not come free the ordinary way and has to be brought free in one motion on ground of your own choosing. She spent the next night building the ground. She did not touch the color, she rearranged its world. In the black unseen, she went through the lower wards like a maintenance crew of one and changed the things that only mattered to a thing that hunted by echo. She propped open a bank of cell gates so the ring corridor's acoustics went long and confusing, so the color's clicks came back mudded. She dragged a fallen color's shock lance. She'd kept one, of course she'd kept one, she kept everything, into the crawl space and bled its charge into a slow cycling arc that ticked softly from a vent, a false click, a lure, a sound with no warm thing behind it. She flooded one dead-end corridor with the sweet gas from a ward she triggered on purpose and let it hang, invisible to the color, a room that read empty and safe by echo and was, in fact, a soft, quiet death for anything that breathed and could not see the shimmer. And she moved Lark. That was the first thing and the last thing and the thing everything else was built around. She moved the child up into the maintenance crawl, into a cold branch of it where a warm, small body would read, on any thermal board, as nothing but a fault in the insulation, and she sealed the crawl's access behind a drone hatch she jammed, and she made Lark repeat the rule until the rule was a reflex. You are insulation. You don't move, you don't make sound, you are a warm patch in a cold wall and nothing hunts a wall. I'm coming back, say it. You're coming back. Say the rest. I'm insulation, I don't move, I don't make sound. The child's blind eyes were wet in the dark. You're coming back. I'm coming back, Wren said, and she did not know if it was true, and she said it like it was, because that was the last gift you could give someone you were leaving in the dark. Then she went to hunt the hunter. It went wrong in the 4th hour, and it went wrong because the color was, in fact, better than her, and Wren had known it might be and had built for it anyway. She meant to draw it into the gas dead end using its own herding logic against it, let it hear her, let it place its sounds to funnel her, and then move like funneled prey right up until the last corner and cut sideways through a cell she'd propped, leaving the color committed to a corridor full of invisible gas. It half worked. The color took the bait, herded her, followed the fleeing warm thing into the corridor, and then at the mouth of the gas dead end it stopped. It did not enter. It had felt something, some wrongness, some absence of the echo return it expected from an empty corridor, some ghost of a thing it had never consciously learned, but that 100 generations of Vorath hunting had put in its legs, and it stopped one body length short of the gas and went still and clicked once, and understood that it had been led. And then it did the thing that made it a professional. It stopped hunting the warm thing that ran and started hunting the cold, clever thing that had built the trap. It went silent. It stopped clicking. It stopped herding. It simply held at the junction and waited for the clever thing to have to move, because everything warm eventually has to move, has to breathe, has to shift a cramping leg. And when Wren, folded into a cross corridor 40 meters off, finally shifted her weight after a quarter hour of stillness, the color heard the whisper of it and it came fast, and it came right. And for the first time since the doctor had opened her eyes, Wren Castellano was the prey and knew it. She ran. Not blind, she could see, but seeing did not make her faster than a Vorath, and she'd known that from the start, and so she did not run to escape. She ran to reach the one piece of ground she'd built and not yet used. Through the long acoustic ring where its clicks would muddy, over the trip plate she'd left live, past the vent where the shock lance ticked its false click, and the color closed the whole way, so close she could see the cold blue length of it in the corner of her stolen sight, so close she felt the air move, and at the last, at the corner she'd chosen, she did the salvager's thing, the thing you do when the hull is coming down and there's exactly one move. She stopped running. Prey does not stop. Everything in the color's long career told it the warm thing would keep running into the corner, and it committed to the corner, to the reach, to the take, and the warm thing was not in the corner. The warm thing had planted and turned and dropped low inside the reach, under the strike, into the 1 meter of space where the color's speed became its enemy, where a thing built to take fleeing prey had no plan for a prey that turned and closed, and Wren put the dead color's shock lance, not swung, jammed, straight and cold and precise, into the soft seam of chitin under the color's forward limbs that she'd spent a night of watching to find, and she gave it the whole charge. The color convulsed. It was not a killing charge. A shock lance was built to drop a prisoner, not kill a professional, and Wren had known that too. It bought her 4 seconds. She used 3 of them to put a second thing into the same seam, the loose-fitting thing, the salvager's economy, the motion that made a joint go the way joints don't. And she used the 4th to be somewhere else, because a Vorath with a ruined limb was still a Vorath, and she had built the ground for exactly this, and the ground did the rest. She led the crippled, enraged, half-blinded hunter 3 corners further. Into the gas dead end it had been too clever to enter while it was whole, and this time it was not clever. This time it was hurt and furious and hunting on instinct. And instinct followed the warm thing into the corridor, and the warm thing went out the propped cell on the far side holding her breath, and the gate dropped behind her on Wren's jammed timer. And the color was sealed in the soft, quiet dark, with the sweet gas it could not see. She did not watch it go down. She'd learned that from the first color on the run, you don't spend air watching a fitting you've already freed. She heard the click slow and thin and stop, and she was already climbing back toward the crawl, toward the cold branch, toward the warm patch in the wall that had not moved and had not made a sound and was, when she pulled the drone hatch, still there. "You came back," Lark whispered. "Told you." Wren's voice didn't shake. Her hands, in the dark where the kid couldn't see them, did a little the delayed animal tremor of a body that had spent everything, and she let them because Lark couldn't see and it cost nothing. Told you I'd come back. Osk watched the color die on the thermal board and did not believe it. He'd seen the contract fee for a Vorath of that grade. He'd seen the thing arrive, seen it vanish off the board within an hour of entering the wards, run so cold the facility's own instruments kept losing it, and he'd thought, with a warden's grim relief, that the strange thing in the lower dark was finally going to be someone else's problem. He'd watched the color take 2 prisoners the first night with a precision that made his scales crawl. And now he watched its cold signature convulse and drag and crawl into a corridor his board flagged as gas-fouled, and stop and cool and go to nothing. And he understood that the small human had not beaten a facility hunter or a line warden. She had beaten a professional the Conquered imported for the specific purpose of killing things that could not be killed by ordinary means. And she had done it in the dark, and she had done it, the feeds suggested, without ever taking a serious wound. He looked for a long time at the frozen image of the corridor where the color had died. Then he did a thing that would have ended his career and possibly his life. And he did it because 2 years of culling nights had built up in him like a pressure, and the human in the dark had, without ever meaning to, given it somewhere to go. He routed the feed to the gallery where Physician Santh was confined, so the doctor could see. So someone in this building who wasn't a monster would know that the thing he'd made had lived through the night. Then he wiped the routing log, and went to stand his post, and waited to find out what the provost would do now that her professional was dead. Seneca Drawl watched the color die without any change in her posture at all. She had built her life on the dark, not metaphorically, literally, brick by black brick, contract by contract, a career spent proving that the cheapest, cleanest, most reliable cage in the Conquered was the simple absence of light. She had risen on it. She had made the Sable Reclamation the model the other reclamation worlds were measured against, and the model was the dark, and the theology was that the dark could hold anything, break anything, because everything that mattered in the galaxy needed to see, and the dark took seeing away. 400 humans had proven her right. 10,000 prisoners across her career had proven her right. And now one small salvager, with a physician's crime behind her eyes, was proving her wrong on the feeds, night after night, where the wardens could watch, where the whisper was already running through the lower wards like water finding a crack. Seneca had not risen by being slow. She understood, watching the color cool, exactly what she was facing and exactly how much larger it was than one prisoner. It was not that the human could see. It was that the human could see and the wards could watch her see, and every warden and every prisoner in the facility was learning in real time that the dark was not a god. It was just a room with the lights off. And a facility that ran on a god could not survive the discovery that the god was a light switch. She keyed her calm. "Prepare the nadir," she said. There was a pause on the other end. The nadir was not run. The nadir was the oldest and deepest ward, the first black stone of the facility, the ward the founders had cut before there was a facility around it, and it was not used for culling or breaking or testing because it did not need to be. Nothing that went into the nadir came out. It was the absolute floor of the dark, sealed, sensorless. Even the warden's thermal boards did not reach it, because the founders had wanted one place that belonged to the dark alone, one place where not even the keepers could see. It was where the provost put the things she wanted the dark to have entirely. "Provost," the gallery warden said carefully, "the nadir has no instrumentation. If we put her in there, we won't be able to watch. We won't have a feed." "I know," Seneca said. "Then how will we know what happens to her?" Seneca Drawl looked at the frozen image of the dead professional on the board, and at the smear of the small human already climbing back toward the child she'd left in the wall. And she felt, for the first time in a career built on absolute certainty, the specific cold of a bet going wrong. "We won't," she said. "That's the point. She's turned every dark I can watch into her ground." So I'll put her in the one dark I can't watch either, the one the founders built for the things even we don't get to see. No feeds, no wardens, no hunters for her to turn. Just her and the child she carries and the oldest black in the facility, sealed, until the dark does what the dark was always going to do to a thing with eyes. She turned from the board. Bring me the physician. He made those eyes. He can watch them go dark from the outside with me, where there's nothing left for either of them to do about it. And then I close the defect, and the facility, and the theology all at once. In the one room, where no one can ever see that it was ever in doubt. They took her at the shift change, and this time they took the child too, and Wren let them, because fighting 6 wardens in a lit transfer corridor was a fitting she could not free, and because she had already understood, the moment the nader's name went out over the wards, where this was going. The word had reached the lower dark before the wardens did. There was an old prisoner 3 cells down, a 4-armed thing gone gray with years, who had been at the Sable Reclamation longer than anyone, and when the warden's order came through, he had pressed his face to the gap in his gate and said, to no one, to the dark, the nader. They're taking her to the nader. And the way he said it had told Wren everything, that the nader was the bottom, the last dark, the place the facility kept for the things it wanted the dark to swallow whole. Where are they taking us? Lark whispered, as the wardens looped their wrists. Down, Wren said, all the way down to the deepest dark they've got. She kept her voice level. It's going to be fine. How do you know? Because deep dark and shallow dark are the same dark, Wren said, and I can see in both. They walked Physician Santh down levels he had never in 11 years been permitted to see, past wards and gates and the long black throat of the facility's spine, down to a place where the walls stopped being fabricated and started being cut, raw stone, the original excavation, the first black stone the founders had opened before there was a facility to wrap around it. The air changed. It got old and still and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, and Tior understood he was being taken into the founders' first work, the seed the whole Sable Reclamation had grown around. The nader was a hole. That was all it was in the end, and the plainness of it was the horror of it. A shaft of raw dark stone, sealed at the top by a single massive iris of black metal, the oldest mechanism in the facility, cut when the founders first decided that the deepest thing they could offer the conquered was a dark that even the keepers could not see into. There was no gallery here. No feed, no thermal board, no observation slit. The founders had built one place that belonged wholly to the dark, and they had built it well, and Tior stood at the lip of it beside the provost with his 4 hands cold, and looked down into a black so total that even his cave sight found nothing in it, nothing at all, and for the first time he was afraid that what he'd given Wren would not be enough. You made her eyes, Seneca said. She stood at the iris control unhurried, her heat pits open on him. You will watch them close. Not on a feed, I don't have a feed here, that's the beauty of it, but here at the lip where you can hear it. That's all the dark leaves you at the bottom, sound. She keyed the iris. It ground open a black mouth into a blacker throat. I have put 10,000 prisoners into darks I could watch. This is the only dark I've ever wanted for myself. No feed, no witness. No doubt logged anywhere that any of it was ever in question. She goes in, the iris seals, and in the one place no one can ever see, the exception ends and the theology holds, and the wards never learn how close it came. She looked at him. You understand why it has to be unwitnessed. Because if it were witnessed, Tior said quietly, and she won, everyone would know the dark is just a room. Because she will not win, Seneca said. There is nothing down there to see, physician. Not warmth, not light, not the ghost of either. Even your eyes couldn't read that hole. Whatever you gave her a way to see things, and down there are no things, just the bottom. She gestured, and the wardens brought Wren and the child to the lip. Wren looked down into the nader. Tior watched her look, and he could not read her. He had never been able to read her, but he saw her eyes move down, and along the wall of the shaft and back up, And he saw something in her face that the provost, reading only the flat cool of her heat, could not have caught. She was surveying it. She was standing at the lip of the pit the founders had built to be unsurvivable, and she was casing it, the way a salvager cases a wreck, and whatever she saw in that total dark, it was not nothing. "Any last thing," the provost offered, "you'd like the physician to hear you say, before the dark has you?" Wren looked at Tior. In the raw light of the warden's hand lamps her eyes were ordinary again, brown, tired, small. "Thank you," she said to him, not dramatic, flat. A salvager thanking the crewmate who'd passed her the right tool. "For the eyes, they're going to be enough." Then the wardens put her and the child into the nadir, and the iris ground shut, and the last of the lamplight was cut off from the top of the shaft, and Tior stood at the sealed lip in the founder's cold with the provost, and listened, and heard nothing, because the nadir gave up nothing, not even sound. "Now we wait," Seneca said, and settled herself against the stone with the patience of a creature that had never once been wrong. "It won't be long. Dark is very fast when there's nothing left to see." The iris sealed above them, and the last light died, and Lark made a small broken sound, and Wren pulled the child against her and said, "SHH, I've got you, I can see. Give me a second, and I'll tell you what's here." Then she gave her eyes their second, and let the nadir assemble itself, and found that the provost had been almost right. Almost. The nadir was very nearly nothing. It was the emptiest dark Wren had ever stood in, emptier than the deadest hull, a shaft of cold stone with no warmth in it and no light and no ghost of either. And for a long moment her eyes strained at a black that gave them nothing to work with, and she felt, for the first time since the doctor had opened them, the cold edge of the old blindness reaching back for her. But nearly nothing is not nothing, and Wren had spent her whole life in the difference. It came slowly. First the faint radiant memory of their own bodies painting the near walls, her heat, Lark's heat, thrown back soft off the cold stone, enough to give the shaft a shape. Then, as her eyes gave up on brightness and reached instead for the trace, the almost, the barely, she found the light. There was light in the nadir. Not much. Not the founder's light, not the warden's light, nothing the conquered had put there. It was older than the conquered. Down the walls of the shaft, in the seams and the damp cuts where the raw stone wept, something grew, a lichen, a moss, a slow, patient, dark thing that had drifted in as a spore in the founder's first excavation, and had spent the centuries since in the one place in the facility no keeper ever looked, and it did what deep, dark, living things across 1,000 worlds had learned to do. It glowed, barely. A cold, faint green-blue luminescence, so dim that no light species eye could ever have caught it, so dim that even the Dreith's heat pits read nothing there because it gave off no heat at all, so dim that it was, for every set of eyes the sable reclamation possessed, simply not there. For Wren's remade eyes, eyes a physician had rebuilt from the whisper of a structure her crepuscular grandmothers used to read the last gray light of a dying day, it was enough. It was, in fact, plenty. The nadir was not a lightless hole. It was a shaft veined in cold, pale glow, faint as breath, and Wren looked at it and felt the old blindness let go of her, and she almost laughed, because the founders had built the deepest dark in the facility and never once known that something had been quietly living in it, and lighting it, for longer than any of them had been alive. "Lark," she said, "it's okay. It's not empty. There's light down here, real light. You can't see it, but it's there and I can." "You're making that up." "I'm not. There's moss on the walls and it glows." Wren was already up, already moving, already doing the thing a salvager did the moment she understood a wreck was survivable. She looked for the way out. And here's the thing about a hole somebody dug, Lark. Somebody had to dig it, and whoever digs a hole this deep doesn't carry the rock up in their pockets. They cut a way to haul it. And then when they're done, they seal the way they came and they forget it, because they built a whole facility on top and never had to think about the bottom again. Her eyes found the shaft wall, followed it up, reading the faint glow that traced every seam and cut in the stone, every place the rock had been worked. And nobody who ever went into this hole after that could see. So nobody ever found the door. She found the door. It was 30 feet up the shaft wall, and it was not a door anymore. It was a capped construction at it, the hall shaft the founders had cut to clear the nadir's stone, and then sealed and rendered and forgotten. A rectangle of dressed rock slightly wrong against the raw cut around it, invisible in any light, obvious in the faint glow of the lichen that had crept along its seams for centuries. A blind thing in the nadir would have died against the wall beneath it, a hand's breadth from a way out it could never know was there. 400 prisoners, Wren thought, and did not let herself think it long, because there was a child to carry and 30 feet of wall to climb, and a provost waiting up top for a silence that was going to disappoint her. "Okay," she said, crouching so Lark could climb onto her back. "Backpack. Last time, I promise. This one's a climb, so you hold tight and you don't let go, and when I say still, you're insulation. You remember insulation." "I'm a warm patch in a cold wall," Lark whispered. "Nothing hunts a wall." "Nothing hunts a wall." Wren stood, the child's weight settling familiar across her shoulders, and looked up the faintly glowing shaft at the forgotten door the dark had hidden from everyone but her. "Let's go home." An hour passed at the sealed lip of the nadir, and then another, and the provost waited with the stillness of stone, and Tior waited beside her and tried to keep his own heat flat so his fear would not read, and heard nothing from below, because the nadir gave up nothing. "You're hoping," Seneca observed at some point. Her pits were on his face. "Your heat keeps rising and falling. You keep hoping and then remembering there's nothing to hope for. It's almost kind watching it, the way hope tires a body out." She settled deeper against the stone. "I've done this 10,000 times, physician, in one form or another. The waiting is always the same. They fight the dark, and the dark doesn't fight back, and that's what breaks them, not cruelty, absence. The dark just declines to contain anything they can use, and after a while, so do they." "You've never done it to her," Tior said. "She is a prisoner in a lightless hole. There is nothing exceptional about that. Exceptional was up in the wards where she had my traps to turn and my hunters to fool and my dark to read by whatever ghost of warmth it held. Down there she has nothing. No traps, no hunters, no warmth, even your eyes, and here, for the first time in the long wait, something moved in the provost's flat certainty, a hairline, even your eyes would find nothing down there. There is nothing to see." "You keep saying that," Tior said quietly, and he did not know why he said it except that 11 years of being the one clean thing in an unclean place had left him, at the very bottom with one small stubborn need, to make the monster doubt once out loud before the end. "You keep saying there's nothing to see, as if you'd know. You've never been down there. You built a dark so total the keepers couldn't watch it either. You made one place in your whole facility that even you are blind to." He turned his wide cave eyes on her. "You don't actually know what's at the bottom, Provost. You only know that you can't see it. And you've spent your whole life mistaking the two." The Provost did not answer him, and the silence that followed was the first silence of the long wait that Tior did not hate, because it was hers. The hall shaft was a salvager's dream and a salvager's nightmare in equal measure. A founder's attic, centuries sealed, the rock cut rough and the old rendering crumbling where the damp had worked it, and it ran up and back at a grade that a blind thing could never have climbed, and a seeing thing could, barely, with a child on its back, and its hands going raw on cold stone. Wren climbed it the way she'd climbed 100 failed accessways in dead ships, 3 points of contact always, weight tested before it was trusted, no move made twice that could be made once. The lichen thinned as she climbed away from the nadir's damp, and for a stretch near the top she went nearly blind again, the glow fading to a memory. And she climbed that stretch on touch and memory alone, on the salvager's craft that had gotten her through the dark long before any doctor gave her eyes, and Lark held on and did not make a sound and was, exactly as promised, a good backpack. The adit ended at a cap, a plug of dressed stone and old sealant where the founders had closed their hall shaft when the nadir was cut and forgotten it forever. Wren set Lark on the last ledge, braced herself, and did the thing a salvager does to a seal that has to come free. She read it, found the seam where age had already done half the work, and helped the age along patiently, quietly, until the cap shifted and grated and came loose into her hands, and beyond it was black air and cold and the faint far ambient glow of a facility's old dead systems. The maintenance spine, the disused bones of the Sable Reclamation, the oldest corridors, unlit, unwatched, forgotten in exactly the way the hall shaft had been forgotten. By keepers who had never needed to see the parts of their own facility that the prisoners couldn't reach. She came up out of the founder's hole into the guts of the facility, and she stood in the cold, dead spine and looked around at a network of dark corridors that no warden had walked in years, and she smiled once in the dark where no one could see it, because a salvager who gets into the maintenance spine of any structure has, functionally, already won. Okay, she breathed, lifting Lark down onto solid decking. New rule. This part I do alone. There's a warm dead end up the spine, an old switching room, no heat, no traffic. You wait there and you are the best insulation in the galaxy, and I come back, and this time when I come back we walk out a door. A real door. Can you give me that? You're coming back, Lark said. It was not a question anymore. The child had stopped asking. I'm coming back. She settled Lark in the switching room and jammed the hatch the way she jammed everything. And then Wren Castellano went into the bones of the facility that had been built to break her and began, coldly, methodically, to take it apart. The turning of the Sable Reclamation took most of a night, and it was not a battle, and that was the thing the survivors could never quite explain afterward. There was no uprising, no charge, no massed prisoners overwhelming their keepers. There was one small human in the maintenance spine who could see, and who understood structures the way the provost understood darkness, and who went through the facility's own systems the way she'd gone through everything, reading it, finding the seams, helping the seams along. The first thing Osk noticed was that the gate started reporting wrong. Not all at once. One at a time across the lower wards, cell gates began logging faults on his board, stuck open, seal failed, plate jammed. The small mechanical lies that a prisoner 2 levels down had been feeding the system for days, except now there were more of them, many more, spreading up the wards in a pattern that was not random, that moved like something walking the spine behind the walls and touching each gate as it passed. Osk stood at his board and watched the wards unlock themselves, gate by gate, and he understood with a lurch what he was looking at. The human was out of the nadir. The human was in the walls, and the human was opening the doors. He should have sounded the alarm. He had a hand on the alarm. He stood there with his hand on it for a long moment, and he thought about 2 years of culling nights, and the woman cornered against the bulkhead, and the physician saying decide for yourself what the dark was for, and the small human threading the gas with a child on her back, and he took his hand off the alarm. Then he did the thing he'd been building toward since the night. He kept the shock lance. He walked off his post, down to the outer transit gate, the big one, the one that opened onto the shuttle dock and the outer rings and the way off this sunless rock, and he began, quietly, to cycle its locks to standby, so that when the prisoners came, the last door would already be open. He was most of the way through it when the first of the provost's loyal wardens found him, a veteran named Drusk, whose scales had gone the deep senior black, and Drusk read the situation off Osk's guilty heat in one look and drew his lance. Traitor, Drusk said, and that was the only word he spent, and he was faster than Osk, and older and better, and Osk got the outer gate to stand by and got his own lance up and got exactly one good strike in before Drusk's charge took him in the chest and put him down against the gate controls he'd just freed. He did not die, that mattered later. But he went down hard, and Drusk turned from him to reverse the gate, to lock the last door before the freed prisoners could reach it, and he had his hand on the control when a small warm shape came out of a maintenance hatch behind him without a sound. She'd felt the gate go to standby through the spine, the change in the system, the last door opening, and she'd been coming to find whoever had done her that favor. And she came out of the wall into a lit dock corridor to find a young warden down and bleeding against the controls, and an old one about to undo the one open door in the facility. She did the salvager's thing to the old warden's lance arm before he finished reaching, and the loose-fitting thing to the rest of him a breath later, cold and precise and without heat, and Drusk went down beside the gate he'd meant to seal, alive, disarmed, folded in the recess of his own certainty, and Wren stepped over him without a second look and put her hand on the outer gate control and held it at standby. Then she crouched by the young warden. She knew him. She'd seen him on the escort, the one whose heat had never carried the enjoyment the others did. "You opened the door," she said. Osk looked up at her, the thing from the dark, the thing that saw, crouched over him in the light where he could finally see it was just a small tired human with raw hands and old blood on her coverall, and he tried to say something and got out only, "The prisoners. The wards are open. They're loose in the dark and they can't see. They'll never find the—" "I know," Wren said. "That's the next part." She pressed his own hand to the wound to slow it, the way you showed a crewmate to hold their own seal. "Stay down, keep this door open. Can you do that?" "Why?" Osk's pits flexed at her, reading a heat that stayed flat and cool even now, even here. "Why aren't you killing us? Any of us. You could. You've had every chance. Why do they all just fall and keep breathing?" "Because a dead warden's a body I have to carry past," Wren said, "and I've got enough to carry." She was already rising, already turning back toward the dark wards where 400 blind people were loose in corridors they couldn't read. And because killing you was always the easy part, the hard part's the door. She looked back at him once. "You picked the hard part. Keep picking it." Then she went back into the dark to do the thing the whole facility had been built to make impossible, the thing no prisoner in the Sable Reclamation had ever been able to do for another. She went to lead the blind out. She could not carry 400 people. She could not even guide 400 people, not directly, not one at a time through corridors they couldn't see. So she did what a salvager does when the hold is flooding and there are more crew than she has hands for. She built a line, and she made the line teach itself. She found the gray old four-armed prisoner first, the one who'd named the Nader, because he was the oldest and the calmest and the others would follow a calm voice in the dark. She put her mouth to the gap in his opening gate and said, "You know my voice, the thing that hunts the hunters. I'm real and I can see, and I'm going to walk you out, but I can't walk all of you, so you're going to be my second set of hands." And she taught him the route, the long ring corridor to the dock, the seams to feel for, the plates to avoid, the count of the junctions, and she put his 4 hands on the shoulders of the 2 prisoners nearest him, and told him to move slow and speak the route aloud as he walked it, so that everyone who could hear could learn it, so that the route became a chant, a handrail made of voices, pass cell to cell down the freed wards in a dozen languages. Long corridor, feel for the seam, mind the 3rd plate, follow the voice ahead. It should not have worked, it half didn't. In the chaos of 400 freed prisoners loose in the dark, some froze and some fled the wrong way, and some, Wren would carry this, quiet and cold, for the rest of her life. Some did not make it out, blind and panicked and swept the wrong direction in the crush, lost in the last dark of a place that had spent their whole imprisonment teaching them there was no help coming, so that when help finally came they could not believe it enough to follow. The gray old prisoner went back for 3 of them and got 2, and the 3rd they did not find, and Wren did not pretend to Lark or to Tior or to herself afterward that the night had been clean. It had not been clean. There is no clean way to empty a dark that was built to keep you. There was a stretch, near the middle of it, where the line nearly came apart entirely, and Wren held it together with the only thing she had, which was the truth said flatly. A knot of 40 prisoners had frozen at the junction where the ring corridor forked, one branch toward the dock and one back toward the deep wards, and the chant had faltered there, because the two ahead of them had taken the wrong fork and the whole line behind had stopped, sensing the hesitation the way blind people in the dark sense everything, through the bodies pressed against them. Panic ran back down the line like a current. Someone began to keen. In another minute they would scatter, and scattered in the dark, most of them would die. Wren went to the fork and put her back to the correct branch and raised her voice, not a shout. She did not have a shout in her, just a flat carrying level that cut through the keening the way a workorder cuts through a failing bridge. Stop. Listen to my voice. I'm the thing that's been keeping you alive down here for 6 nights, and I am standing at the right door and I am not going to move, so all you have to do is come toward me and you will walk out of here. The keening thinned. You've spent your whole time in this place being told there's no help. I know. They built it so you'd believe that. They were wrong, and the proof is that my voice is coming from the way out, and it isn't going to stop until the last of you is past me. She kept talking. That was the trick of it, the salvager's trick with a panicking crew. You did not reassure them. You simply refused to stop being a fixed point, a thing in the dark that stayed put and stayed calm while everything else moved, until the moving things organized themselves around your stillness. The line found the fork. The line held. And 40 people who had been 30 seconds from dying in the dark walked past a small, steady voice toward a door, and every one of them reached out as they passed and touched her shoulder, her arm, her hand, needing to feel that the fixed point was a real warm thing, and not just a mercy the dark had invented to torture them. And Wren let every one of them touch her and did not move until the last had gone by. But the line held mostly. The chant carried mostly, and through the long night the freed of the sable reclamation felt their way down a handrail made of each other's voices, toward a door a wounded warden held open, while a small human moved up and down the dark beside them. A hand on a shoulder here, a body lifted there, a warden folded quietly into a recess before he could reach the crowd, seeing for all of them, everywhere at once, the one pair of eyes in the whole black facility that the dark could not close. The calm woke first. It chirped against the founder's silence, a gate fault alert, then another, then a cascade of them, the sound of a board somewhere lighting up with 100 small lies, and Seneca Drawl's head turned toward it with the slow deliberation of a creature that had not expected to turn its head again tonight. "Report," she said into the calm. Nothing answered but more faults. Then a warden's voice, high and cracking with a fear Tior had never heard from a Dreeth. "Provost, the wards, the lower wards are opening, all of them. The gates are failing across 3 levels. The prisoners are there loose, there in the ring corridors, and something's in the spine, Provost. Something's moving in the maintenance spine and we can't get a signature on it. It runs cold, we can't." "That's impossible," Seneca said, and it was the first time in 11 years Tior had heard her say a thing was impossible, and the pleasure of it was so sharp and so shameful that he had to look away from her into the dark. "The subject is in the nadir. The nadir is sealed. I sealed it myself." Her pits swept the black around them and found nothing, because there was nothing at the sealed lip but cold stone and a physician whose heat had just quietly begun to rise, not with fear now, but with something the provost, for all her skill, had never learned to read off a face. Hope fully arrived. "You sealed the top," Tior said. Seneca went still. "You sealed the top," he said again softly, "of a hole the founders dug, and a hole that's dug has to be dug from somewhere. You made one dark so total even you couldn't see into it, and then you put into it the one creature in your whole facility who doesn't need you to see for her." He turned his wide eyes on her in the black. "She's not dying at the bottom of your pit, Provost. She found the bottom of your pit interesting, and now she's in your walls." The calm was still going. The wards were still opening, and somewhere far above them, faint through the founder's stone, there came a sound that had never in the history of the sable reclamation been heard in its corridors, a sound so foreign to the place that it took Tior a long moment to name it, Voices. Many voices. Prisoners' voices raised together, not screaming, chanting. A low, steady chant passed mouth to mouth, a root spoken aloud and repeated, a handrail made of sound, the noise of the blind leading the blind toward a door. Seneca Drawl listened to the sound of her theology dying 2 levels up, and then she did the thing that made her, to the very end, formidable. She did not panic. She did not rage. She reached into the cold, clear place that had built a career out of the dark, and she made a decision. "She'll come here," the provost said. "Whatever she's doing up there, the gates, the prisoners, it's noise. It's cover. She knows I'm here, and she knows the physician is here, and she is a creature that finishes things. She'll come down here to close it, and she'll come through the dark on her ground, thinking the dark is hers." Seneca drew the long knife that Senior Dreeth carried and never used, the ceremonial blade of a caste that had not needed to fight with its hands in generations, and she moved back against the raw stone of the founder's cut, into the deepest black at the nadir's lip, and she let her heat drop and her breathing slow, and she became what a Dreeth of her line could become when it chose. A hunter, in the dark, with pit eyes open, waiting. "You mistake the dark for yours, girl," she said, to the black, to no one, to the thing she knew was coming. "You've had shallow wards and moss light and a physician's trick behind your eyes. I have had the dark my whole life. It was mine before your species crawled up out of the mud. Come and find out whose it really is." She left where he stood, unarmed, useless. A witness after all, because a provost who wins in the unwitnessed dark is a provost with a doubt. And Seneca Drawl had decided she wanted this one thing witnessed, wanted the physician to watch his creature broken on the ground she'd chosen, so that whatever happened in the wards above, the last true thing in the facility would be Tior's memory of the human dying in the black at the provost's own hands. She came down the spine toward the founder's cut, and she came alone, and she came because Tior was down there, and because a thing left half-freed is a thing that comes back on you, and she knew, the way a salvager knows a wreck still has one live cell in it, that the provost would not simply run. She felt the change in the air as she descended past the last of the fabricated corridors into the raw stone. The maintenance spine gave way to the founder's original cut, and the ambient glow of the dead systems fell behind her, and the dark got older and deeper and truer, and Ren slowed, because a salvager who feels the light going and keeps her pace is a salvager who dies in the dark. She let her eyes reach. And down the cut at the lip of the nadir, she found the shape of Tior, standing, warm, alive, and beside him the cold stone, and against the cold stone. Nothing, a gap in the warmth, a patch of wall that read colder than it should, a stillness with an edge to it, a place where the dark declined to give up what it held. Ren stopped. The provost had gone cold. Not cold like the color, not the running cold of a professional's chitin, but the willed cold of a creature slowing its own blood, dropping its own heat against the stone until even Ren's remade eyes, hunting for warmth in the near dark, found only a hole in the wall where a hole should not be. It was clever. It was, Ren admitted in the cold procedural back of her mind, the single cleverest thing anyone in this facility had done to her. Because the whole gift the doctor had given her leaned on the trace, the almost, the faint warmth and fainter light that filled every dark the provost had ever built. And here at the very bottom the provost had made herself into an absence, a piece of the nothing, the one thing in the dark that Ren's eyes were built to overlook. "You feel it," the provost's voice came out of the cold patch, low and certain and unhurried. "The moment the dark stops being yours, I built 10,000 of those moments. I know exactly how it lands." The cold patch did not move, and Tior's head turned toward it and away, unable to find it either. "You've been the thing that sees, girl, in a facility full of things that can't. Down here we're both hunters in the dark. The difference is I've been one longer." Ren did not answer. Answering told a heat treater where your mouth was. She had learned that the first hour off the sled, watching the doctor say true things and stop. She looked at the cold patch, and she thought, cold and clean, the way she thought about a fitting that would not come free the ordinary way. It's not invisible. It's cold. Cold is a thing, too. The color ran cold, and I still built the ground under it. You can hide your warmth. You can't hide that you've hidden it. A cold that shouldn't be there is its own kind of light if you stop looking for warm and start looking for wrong. And she stopped looking for warm. That was the whole of it, in the end. And it was the most human thing she did in the whole black facility. And no instrument the Conquered owned could have measured it. She stopped hunting the thing the doctor's gift was built to find. And she started hunting the absence of it, the wrongness, the too cold seam, the piece of dark that was trying too hard to be dark. And the provost, who had made herself perfectly cold against the stone, stood out against the ordinary cold of the founder's cut like a cutout, like a held breath, like a lie in a room full of true things. She had hidden her warmth so completely that the hiding itself was the only warm-blooded thing in the cut. Wren saw her, and the provost, pits open, waiting, did not know she'd been seen. What happened next happened in the dark, and Tior did not see it, and that was the last cruelty the nadir dealt out, that the one witness the provost had wanted was blind to the thing he'd been kept to watch. He heard it. He would arrange the sounds into an account for the rest of his life, and never be sure he had them in the right order. He heard the provost's certainty break the silence, a single low word, a hunter's word, the sound a dreath makes when it commits. He heard the ceremonial knife move through air. He heard it strike stone, not flesh, because the girl was not where the provost's pit eyes had placed her, because the girl had gone low and cold, and to the side the way she'd gone at every hunter in the facility, into the 1 meter where reach becomes a burden. He heard the provost turn, fast, faster than a creature that old had any right to move, hunting the warm thing that should have been in front of her and was already past her shoulder. He heard the scrabble of the great predator recalculating, the small sounds of a certainty coming apart in real time, the provost lunging for a heat that kept not being where her whole life told her it would be, striking the cold stone, the founder's own dark, again and again, while something small and unhurried moved around her in it, seeing her, choosing angles, taking her apart not with a weapon, but with the plain cold fact of being able to see the one thing in the room that couldn't see back. He heard the knife fall and skitter across stone. He heard a heavy body meet the ground, not thrown, folded, the salvager's economy, a joint made to go the way joints don't. He heard the provost's breathing, ragged now and close to the lip. And then he heard the girl speak, once, from somewhere the provost's head turned toward and could not find. "You were right about one thing," Wren said. "Level, cold. No triumph in it, which was the worst of it, Tior thought, for the creature on the ground, no triumph, no anger, nothing the provost could have understood or bargained with, just a fact being finished. The dark's a good cage, best one there is. You just built it for the wrong species." She had been on the ground perhaps 4 times in her long life, and never once at the hands of prey, and the strangeness of it reached her before the fear did. Seneca lay against the cold stone at the lip of the nadir with a leg that would not answer and a wrist that had gone soft in a way wrists were not built to go, and she could not find the human. Her pits were open all the way. They swept the dark and gave her the physician's warmth, the ambient nothing of the stone, the cooling heat of her own spilled effort, and nowhere in it, nowhere at all, the creature that had put her down. The human had gone cold too. Had learned it somewhere tonight in the wards, off the color, off the dark itself, had learned to hide her heat the way Seneca had hidden hers, so that the 2 apex hunters of the sable reclamation lay in the founder's black, each unable to find the other, except that one of them could see, and one of them could not, and Seneca understood at last, fully, in her body, what she had spent the night refusing to understand in her mind. The dark had never been a god. It had been a leash, and the leash had only ever worked because everything she caged needed to see. She had built a religion out of a light switch, and a career out of the accident that no one she'd ever caged had known how to work without it, and now something had come that could, and the whole edifice, the wards, the traps, the culling knights, the theology, the 10,000 broken souls, the nadir itself. The whole edifice was revealed for what it had always been, which was a room. A room with the lights off, full of frightened people and her. "Kill me then," she said to the dark, and hated the crack in her own voice, the rise of her own heat that would tell the creature exactly where her throat was. "Finish it. You finished everything else." "No," Wren's voice said close now, from a direction the provost's pit swore was empty. "I told you. A dead warden's a body I have to carry past." A pause, and then the sound of the great iris mechanism at the nadir's lip, waking, grinding, the black mouth opening again into the blacker throat. "But you built a place for the things you wanted the dark to have. No feed, no witness, no way for anyone to ever see it was in doubt." The cold voice did not gloat. It simply arranged the facts the way it had arranged everything else. "Seems a waste to leave it empty." Seneca Drawl felt the small, strong hands find her, cold, precise, without heat, and she understood where she was going. And for the first time in a life built on the absolute confidence of the dark, the provost of the Sable Reclamation was afraid of it. "There's light down there," the human told her almost gently at the very end, as if it were a mercy, and perhaps it was, or perhaps it was the cruelest thing of all. "Moss, it glows, been glowing the whole time, longer than you've been alive. You built the deepest dark in the galaxy, and you never once knew it wasn't dark at all. A breath. You'll never see it, but it's there. Think about that at the bottom. Everything you were so sure was empty, full of a light you were just never built to catch." And Seneca Drawl, who had put 10,000 souls into dark she could watch, went down into the one dark she could not, and the iris ground shut above her, and sealed, and the Founder's first black stone had, at last, the one thing it had been cut to hold, a keeper who could not see. The iris sealed, and the silence came back, and Tior Santh stood in the Founder's cut and could not, for a long moment, make his 4 hands move. Then a small, warm shape was in front of him. He felt it before his cave eyes resolved it, the heat of her, alive, close, and Wren's voice said, "Doctor, you still with me?" "You're alive," he said. It was all he had. "So are you. Come on." A hand found his sleeve, small and raw-knuckled and steady. "There's a door open 2 levels up and a wounded warden holding it and about 300 people who need to be walked to it, and I've only got the 1 pair of eyes. You've got night sight, right? Cave species. You can see down here better than any Dreeth." Tior looked around the Founder's cut, and his own dim sight gave it back to him in soft grays, the stone, the sealed iris, the way up. "Yes, in this, yes, not like you, but—" "Then you're my second set of eyes," Wren said, already turning him toward the spine, already moving, because there was still a facility full of blind people between here and the door, and the night was not over just because the theology was dead. Turns out the dark needs a lot of eyes when you're trying to get people out of it instead of into it. Let's go. And Tior Santh, who had spent 11 years standing in the only lit room in a black facility, telling himself that keeping things alive was the one clean act available to him, followed the human he had remade up out of the Founder's dark to find out what it was like, for once, to use his eyes for the other thing. He had walked these corridors for 11 years, and he had never once walked them like this, in the dark, with his own night sight the only light he carried, beside a human who moved through the black ahead of him, reading it whole while he caught only the near grays. It changed the facility. It unmade it. The wards that had been, from the gallery, a clean grid of managed suffering were, from inside the dark, only frightened people in a maze, feeling along walls, clutching at the chant that carried down the corridors like a rope. Tior had kept 400 of them breathing over the years and had told himself that was mercy. Now he walked among them in their own dark and understood that breathing had never been the mercy. Seeing was the mercy. And he had stood in the only room that had it, and never once carried it down the stairs. "Here," Wren said low, at a junction where 2 knots of blind prisoners had met in the dark, entangled and frozen, each too afraid to move for fear of the other. "They can't tell each other apart from a hunter. Tell them." Your voice, they know a warden's voice, but they've never heard a warden say this. It'll land harder from you. Tior did not want to. 11 years of keeping his voice flat and clinical had built a wall in him, and speaking through it cost more than he expected. But he opened his mouth in the dark and said to the frozen tangle of prisoners, "There are no hunters left in this ward. Move toward the chant. The door is open. I am the physician, you know my voice, and I am telling you the door is open." And the tangle came apart and moved, because a warden's voice had said the one thing a warden's voice had never said, and Tior felt something in his own chest come apart with it. They worked the wards for the better part of the night, focal widens with the work. It was not clean and it was not fast, and Ren never once pretended it was either. For every knot of prisoners the chant carried out, there was one it lost, the ones too broken to believe, the ones who fled the guiding voices as if they were tricks, the ones the dark had taught so thoroughly that help itself read as a threat. The gray four-armed prisoner, who had made himself the anchor of the chant, went back 3 times into wards already emptying to pull out the stragglers. And the 3rd time he came back with only one where he'd gone for 2, and he stood in the ring corridor with the one he'd saved and said nothing. And Ren put a hand on his gray shoulder in the dark and said nothing either, because there was nothing to say that the night hadn't already said. There were wardens too. Not many, most had fled for the dock the moment the wards began to open, choosing the shuttles over a fight in a dark that had suddenly stopped being theirs. But a handful of the provost's loyal veterans held pockets of the facility, and those Ren dealt with the way she dealt with all the rest, cold and precise and without heat, folding them into recesses and moving on, leaving them breathing because carrying bodies was work and she had enough work. Tior watched her do it and understood, finally and completely, the thing the catalog had never had a category for. It was not that she was strong, though she was. It was not that she was fast, though she was that too. It was that she never once got angry. Through the whole long night, through the wards and the hunters and the provost in the dark, her heat stayed flat and cool and level, and she finished each thing that had to be finished and moved to the next, and there was no rage in it anywhere. And that Tior thought, watching a small human empty a death camp built by a species that had catalogued her as harmless. That absence of anger was the most frightening and the most human thing he had ever seen. They reached the dock as the facility's long night ticked toward its meaningless dawn. Osk was still at the gate. He'd held it pale, bled thin, propped against the controls he'd freed, but conscious, and the outer transit gate stood open behind him onto the shuttle dock and the cold hard stars and the way off the sunless rock. The freed of the Sable Reclamation came down the last corridor in a long feeling line, hand on shoulder, the chant gone ragged and exhausted and still holding, and they came out of the dark of the wards into the raw dockside light and stopped, many of them, and flinched and wept, because most of them had not seen light in months or years and had forgotten it existed, and the plain cold worklight of a shuttle dock was, to them, a sunrise. Ren did not stop for the light. She went straight to Osk. "You held it," she said. "I held it." The young warden looked up at her and past her at the river of freed prisoners flowing onto the dock, and something moved in his scaled face that Tior had never seen on a Dreeth. "There are how many?" "How many did we?" "Not all of them," Ren said flat, because she did not lie to anyone and she was not going to start with the one warden who'd earned the truth. "Not close to all of them, but more than none, more than this place ever let out its whole life." She crouched by him, checked the wound with a salvager's rough competence, glanced at Tior. "He'll keep." "He'll keep," Tior said, already at the warden's side, his 4 hands doing the one clean thing they knew. The strike missed the core line. "He'll keep." "Good." Ren straightened, and for the first time all night Tior saw her sway, just slightly, the delayed animal exhaustion of a body that had spent everything and was only now being told the emergency was over. She put it away almost before it showed. "I've got one more to get, up in the spine, small, been the best backpack in the galaxy all night." She was already moving back toward the dark. Get them onto the shuttles, Doctor, all of them. You know the dock systems, you've been here 11 years, get them off this rock before whatever's left of the Concord's wardens decides to make the dock a fight. She looked back once. I'll be right behind you, I always come back, asked the kid. And she went back into the dark one last time, up the cold spine to the switching room, and pulled the jammed hatch, and found the warm patch in the cold wall exactly where she'd left it, still, silent, insulation. Lark, she said, doors open, real door. Told you. The child came out of the wall and into Wren's arms and held on, and this time Wren carried her not as a backpack, but the way you carry a child, against her chest, the small face tucked into her neck, and she walked her down out of the guts of the Sable Reclamation, and out through the open gate onto the dock, into the light, and Lark lifted her head and squinted at the brightness she had not seen in longer than she could remember, and made a small sound that was not fear. Is that the sun? The child whispered. No, baby, Wren said. It's just dock lights, but there'll be a sun. Somewhere down the line there'll be a real one. We'll go find one with a sky over it. She carried the child up the ramp of the last shuttle into the press of the freed, and did not look back at the black facility behind her, because a salvager who's freed the last cell does not spend a glance on the wreck she's leaving. We'll go find a sky. They got off the sunless moon with a warden's access codes, and a physician's clearance, and the particular kind of luck that runs out the moment you stop needing it. Tior flew the lead shuttle himself. 11 years of clearance meant the dock systems opened for him without question, right up until someone in the facility's failing command tried to lock the launch cradles. And by then the cradles were empty, and the shuttles were climbing away from the black rock on cold thrust. 311 freed prisoners packed into holds meant for cargo, and the Sable Reclamation fell away below them into the dark it had been built to be. No Concord cruiser came. That surprised Tior at the time and stopped surprising him later when he understood it. The nearest Concord response was 6 long days out, and by the time it arrived the shuttles were scattered across 4 outer ring systems on falsified transit codes, and the facility itself was dark and open and empty, the ward standing wide, the nadir sealed with its one blind keeper, and there was nothing for the Concord to respond to except a question it did not want to have to answer out loud. The question was the thing that got out. Not the prisoners. Prisoners escape sometimes. The Concord had procedures. The Concord could absorb and escape. The question was what could not be absorbed, and the question spread from the freed of the Sable Reclamation across the outer rings faster than any cruiser could have chased it, mouth to mouth, the way the chant had spread through the wards. The question was, what if they can see? Every reclamation world in the Concord ran on the same theology. Not all of them used pure dark, some used cold, some used depth, some used the slow crush of isolation. But the dark ones, the cheap ones, the profitable ones, the model ones that the Sable Reclamation had been the model of, every one of them ran on the single load-bearing assumption that a caged thing could not see its cage. It was the assumption under all the others. It was the reason a lightless ward needed no walls a determined prisoner couldn't break, no guards a clever prisoner couldn't slip. Because the dark did the guarding, the dark was the wall, and the dark only held if the thing inside it was blind. And now, across the outer rings, the thing inside the dark had been seen to see. One human, one physician's crime, one night, and the assumption under all the assumptions had a crack in it that could not be sealed, because you cannot unknow a question once it's been asked in every language on every dock. Every keeper of every dark cage in the Concord now had to look at their prisoners and wonder, which of these can see? And they could not tell. That was the unbearable part, the part that did the real work. A blind prisoner and a seeing one looked exactly the same in the dark. The Sable Reclamation had proven it. The provost had looked at Wren Castellano across a lit table and read her as prey, and been wrong. And there was no test, no scan, no instrument that reliably told the difference once the lights went out, because the difference was a whisper of a structure the catalog had sworn didn't exist, and a craft the catalog had never thought to record. The dark prisons did not fall in a night. Institutions never do. But they began, quietly, expensively, to change, to add the walls and the guards and the locks that the dark had let them skip, because the dark could no longer be trusted to do the guarding, because somewhere in every ward now there might be one pair of eyes that made the whole black economy a room with the lights off. And a cage that needs real walls and real guards is a cage that costs real money, and the reclamation worlds had never been about justice. They had been about cheapness, and the moment the dark stopped being free, the whole model started, slowly, to die. That was the thing Ren Castellano did that no fleet could have done. She did not defeat the conquered. She made the dark unreliable, and an empire that had built its cheapest cruelty on the reliability of the dark found, over the following years, that its cheapest cruelty had gotten expensive, and expensive cruelties are the first ones an empire lets go. They came to ground in the end on a scrap of a world in the far rings, a mining moon with a thin sky and a long night, and a small human settlement that asked few questions of the strangers who arrived on falsified codes with a hold full of the freed. It had a sun. Not much of one, low and orange and far, but a real one with a real sky over it, and Lark stood in the open on the first day and looked up at it for a long time without saying anything, and Ren stood beside her and let her look. Tior found Ren that evening on the settlement's edge, at the line where the work lights ended and the moon's long dark began. She was sitting just past the last light, in the dark, at ease in it, watching the night the way other people watched a fire. "You sit in the dark now," he said. It was not quite a question. "I like it out here." Ren didn't turn. In the dark past the lights, her eyes caught the faint orange of the far sun still bleeding over the horizon and threw it back with a whisper of green shine, the tapetum he'd unbricked doing its quiet work. "It's not empty. You were right about that. It never was. I just spent my whole life not being able to prove it." She was quiet a moment. "Sit down, Doctor. You can see out here better than they can. Might as well use it for something that isn't a job." He sat. The two of them looked out at the long dark of the mining moon, the physician who had spent 11 years in the only lit room in a black facility, and the salvager he had given the dark to. And for a while neither of them said anything, because there was a great deal that did not need saying and both of them knew it. "I have to ask you something," Tior said finally, "and I need the true answer, not the kind one. Those are usually the same thing with me. I'm bad at kind." A ghost of something in her voice. "Ask." "What I did to your eyes." Tior turned his 4 hands over in the dark, looked at them, the hands that had reached into the deepest architecture of a creature not his own, and lifted away a brick her species had forgotten. "I told myself, going in, that I wasn't adding anything. That I was only finishing what your grandmothers started. That the structure was already there and I was just opening the door. I told myself that so I could do it." He looked at her. "Was that true, or was that the thing I said so I could live with it?" Ren considered the question the way she considered everything, without hurry, without flinching, turning it over for the fault lines. "Both," she said. "It was true, and it was the thing you said so you could live with it. Those aren't different." She drew her knees up, watching the dark. "You didn't put anything in me that wasn't mine. I believe you about that, and I've had a lot of nights down there to decide whether I believe you, and I do. My people used to hunt at the edge of the light, dusk, dawn, the gray hour. That's what the eyes were for, back before we built ourselves so many lamps we forgot we ever needed them. You didn't make me into something. You woke up something we let go to sleep." She glanced at him. "But here's the part you're actually asking. You want to know if it's in the others, the rest of my kind, all of them." Tior said nothing, which was its own answer. "It is," Ren said. "That's what you're afraid of, and you're right to be, and it's too late to be afraid of it, because you already proved it can be woken up, and the conquered already watched what happens when it is." She looked back out at the dark. "You didn't give the dark to one salvager, Doctor. You showed the whole galaxy that the thing they catalogued as a day animal, helpless in the black, was always just a species that had turned its lamps up too high to remember what it used to be. Every human in every dark cage they've got is carrying a door that's only bricked over. You prove the brick comes out. A pause. They're going to spend a very long time being afraid of that, and they should be, but it won't help them. You can't unknow that the prey can see. That's the whole thing. That's what got out. Osk healed slowly and stayed. That was its own small strangeness. A Dreeth warden living among the people he'd once kept, and it did not go easily at first. There were among the freed those who could not look at his scaled face without seeing the culling nights, and Wren did not ask them to, and did not ask him to leave either. She put him to work. A warden knew locks and gates and systems, and a frontier settlement needed those things built well, and Osk built them, and slowly the thing he had done at the outer gate outweighed, for most of them, the thing he had been before it. He did not talk much about the sable reclamation. Once late, he said to Tior, "I keep waiting to find out it was more complicated than it looked, that there was some reason, and there wasn't. It was just a room with the lights off, and we were the reason it was dark." He never said it again. He didn't need to. Tior became the settlement's physician. The plainness of it was the mercy of it. He set bones and treated the mining sicknesses and delivered the settlement's children, and he did it in good light, real light, with nothing bricked over and nothing to keep flat. And for the first time in his life, the phrase keeping them breathing meant only what it said and nothing underneath it. He had spent 11 years telling himself that the one clean act available to him was to keep the caged alive, and he had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost 400 humans their sight while he stood in the only room that had light. He did not forgive himself for that. But he stopped standing in the light while others sat in the dark, and that, he came to believe, was the only kind of forgiveness a man in his position had any right to. Lark grew. Focal touches her briefly. The child who had been kept in the lower dark for whatever the lower dark kept children for did not talk about it, and Wren did not make her, and the settlement's long nights were hard on her for a long time. She slept with a light and woke at silences, and there were months when the dark took something out of her that daylight had to slowly put back. But she grew. She learned the mining moon's thin sky and its far orange sun and its long soft nights. And one evening in her second year of freedom, Wren found her sitting past the last of the work lights, out in the dark on purpose, the way Wren sat. "I can't see out here," Lark said when Wren settled beside her. "Not like you, it's just dark to me." A pause. "But I wanted to sit in it on purpose, because I chose to this time." She leaned into Wren's side. "It's different when you choose it." "Yeah," Wren said, "it is." She never told the whole story of the sable reclamation, and neither did the freed, not because they were sworn to silence, but because there was no way to tell it that made it smaller than it was, and they had all decided without deciding to live in the after and not the during. But the after was shaped by the during whether they told it or not. The reclamation worlds changed. The dark got expensive. Somewhere across the rings, in council chambers and audit halls Wren would never see, the Conquered quietly retired the model that had built the sable reclamation and 100 cages like it, and rewrote the line in the catalog that had called her homeworld a Daythings world, a bright world, a place of helpless things, rewrote it. One clerk later admitted in a record that eventually drifted out to the rings, because leaving it as it was had begun to feel, to the people who kept the catalog, like a standing invitation to be wrong again. The new line in the catalog was shorter than the old one. It did not call Earth a day world anymore. It said, in the flat clinical language of a bureaucracy that had learned something the hard way and did not enjoy the lesson, that the species should not be housed in the dark under any circumstances, and it did not fully explain why, and the not explaining was itself the warning, passed keeper to keeper, the way the chant had passed cell to cell. Don't put them in the black. You'll think it holds them. It won't. And you won't be able to tell until it's too late to matter. Wren heard about the catalog change years on, from a trader passing through, and she took it the way she took most things, without much on her face. But that night she went out past the last of the settlement's lights and sat in the moon's long dark, and let her eyes do the quiet thing the doctor had woken in them, and looked at a night that was, to every other person in the settlement asleep behind her, simply nothing, an absence, a blank, the empty dark you shut your door against. It was not empty. It never had been. There was the faint bleed of the far sun still under the horizon, and the cold glow of the mining lichen in the rock seams, and the slow, warm shapes of the settlement's animals moving in the scrub, and the whole living grain of a world that everyone around her had been taught to treat as void because their eyes had never been asked to try. Her grandmothers had seen it once at the edge of the light in the gray hour, when seeing into the almost dark meant living to see the morning. The galaxy had taken that hour and turned it into a cage and bet everything on the blindness inside it. They'd bet wrong. They'd bet against a species that had spent 100,000 years learning to work in exactly the light they thought was no light at all. And then they'd handed one of that species back her oldest eyes and locked her in the dark and called it certain. Wren sat in the long night of the mining moon, seeing it all at ease, unbothered, small and dirt-worn and calm, and she thought about the provost at the bottom of the nadir, in the deepest dark in the galaxy, surrounded by a faint pale light she had never once been built to catch. The dark had been their whole theology, their wall, their guard, their god, their leash, and it turned out the dark was only ever a question about who was doing the looking. She stood after a while and went back toward the settlement's lights, where the people she'd walked out of the black were sleeping under a real sky. She did not hurry. There was nothing in the dark behind her to hurry from. There never had been, not for her, and not, she understood now, for any of them if they could only be woken up to see it. Behind her the long night lay over the mining moon, full of a quiet light, waiting for eyes patient enough to find it. Ahead of her the settlement's lamps burned low and warm and unafraid. Wren Castellana walked home between the two, at home in both, and closed her door against neither.